This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate second part of What If Naruto and Hinata Went Rogue. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
As his father withdrew his hand from Naruto's sleek hair, Naruto started. I don't understand. 1 minute I was in the Nine-Tails lair, and the next I'm here. What's going on? Naruto asked, making his mother laugh. The fourth sat down on the soft grass encircling the many flowers in the serene garden and said, before your mother and I died, we managed to seal a fragment of our chakra within you, so that we could see you and speak to you, but it won't last forever, maybe another 30 minutes. The fourth motioned for Naruto to sit, and Naruto did so. I never would have thought you'd try to control the Kyuubi at such a young age. The fourth looked Naruto in the eyes, and a thoughtful expression filled his face. Your mother and I are very proud of you. The fourth smiled. Naruto's mother interrupted, then burst out laughing, the perks of having an Uzumaki and a Namikaze as parents. After a few moments of staring at his mother, Naruto gave his mother a heartfelt laugh in return. So, you're an Uzumaki then? Naruto asked, addressing his mother alone. His mother simply nodded in response to his query, I've never heard of the Namikaze. Naruto muttered to himself as he gazed thoughtfully at the ground. Why haven't I heard of the Namikaze? The fourth was never specifically mentioned by the villagers or other ninjas. The fourth said, the third really did live up to his promise then? Which made Naruto wake up from his contemplative state. I had made the third promise that you never know of my family, or that you are my son. It looks like his promise was well kept. The fourth laughed in remembrance of his friend. We've seen everything that has happened during your life, Naruto. All the events and dire situations the Nine-Tails has burdened on you. The fourth took a moment to gather his thoughts before continuing. We know how difficult it has been for you, Naruto. The fourth placed a delicate hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, but we've been with you the entire time, guiding you, trying our best to protect you. Naruto snarled, removing his father's hand from his shoulder. And when I had to kill my friends, did you guide me then? He asked. With deliberate shaking of his head, Naruto whispered bitterly, everything I've had to do in my life is your fault. If you hadn't sealed the Nine-Tails in me, everything would have been different. The fourth slowly withdrew his hand and placed it on his lap. Everything I've done in my life, I've done on my own. Naruto screamed, his anger that had been building for years finally erupting without any intention of stopping. Naruto tried to calm himself by taking several deep breaths. He heard his mother stealthily approach him and lay down on the floor next to Naruto. Naruto's mother softly repressed the accumulated annoyance in Naruto by whispering, Naruto, you have to understand that your father and I had no other choice. We didn't want your life to turn out like this, but there was nothing we could do to stop it. The scarlet-haired woman smiled and placed her delicate hand on Naruto's forearm, sending a wave of warmth through Naruto's body. Naruto sighed but said nothing else. You have to understand that we would give anything to have things turn out differently, but it cannot be done. Trusting in false hope only fools yourself. Curious, Naruto shuffled himself closer to his mother and asked the two, why didn't you want me to know you were my parents? As he rubbed his chin tenderly, the fourth said, we wanted to protect you. We knew that if you had learned that we had sacrificed our lives to protect Konoha, you would have come to hate Konoha, and we didn't want that for you. Naruto asked sourly, so you wanted me to betray the village instead? Before gritting his teeth. As he sheepishly scratched his opulent golden hair, the Hokage joked, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere. Nobody could foresee the treachery that the sixth would commit, not even I. He betrayed the hidden leaf by murdering the fifth, and now he's turned the entire village against you. We never foresaw these unfortunate events. Naruto, you have to understand that your mother and I did not have a choice in the matter. It was either save Konoha, or allow Konoha to perish. The former seemed like the obvious choice. Naruto sarcastically said, yeah, like I didn't know that already, Dad. Do you have anybody in other villages that could help you? There must be somebody. Naruto's mother laughed at his abrupt tone shift, but the fourth finally disregarded his sarcasm. What do you mean by, help me? Nobody would listen to me. The sixth has set bounty of significant value on Hinata and myself. We would be killed before we even made it to a village. Naruto clarified, the sixth has probably thought of the possibility of us asking for aid from the other villages, and has informed them to expect me. There's no way I can go to any other village now, it's too dangerous. The fourth said, Gaara, I think his name was. What about that other Jinchuriki in the Sand Village? Gaara? No. There's too much at stake here to involve him in this. Besides, the entire village would kill me on sight. Naruto, speaking with Gaara, and telling him the entire situation would be one of the best courses of action at this moment in time. Not only does he trust you and cherish your friendship, he would also do whatever is in the best interest of Konoha. and right now only you hold that information. The Hokage responded quickly. So you think it's a good idea to go out into the open, expose not only myself, but also Hinata, Itachi and Kisame, so I can talk with Gaara? Naruto asked. Your teammates will not be at risk, they don't have to accompany you on this journey. It would be safer if they stay at the hideout, the fourth carefully clarified. As he started to consider his next move, Naruto sighed deeply to himself. There's no way Itachi would even think about letting me leave. He would rather die than put me at risk. But this isn't going to be easy, not even in the slightest. I may be powerful, but against several capable ninjas, I don't stand a chance. Naruto whispered, allowing the fourth to smile slightly. Naruto's mother yelled, we know you'll stay safe. We're your parents after all. Naruto laughed to himself and said, my parents who still haven't told me their names however. As his little smile widened, Minato said, we were waiting for you to ask us. My name is Minato, and you already know most ninjas referred to me as the Yellow Flash. In response to Naruto's indirect question, Kushina enthusiastically replied, and my name is Uzumaki Kushina, but you already knew the Uzumaki bit. She let herself smile, too. Naruto asked, so, you both really think it's a good idea to see Gaara? Minato replied quickly, if we didn't, we wouldn't have brought it up. It looks like it's time. Kushina whispered solemnly before meeting Naruto's eyes, Naruto, for what time we had, I'm glad I got to see my son all grown up. We love you. She slowly leaned towards Naruto's soft and fragile cheeks and gave him a calming motherly kiss. Naruto started to notice his parents' bodies disappearing, as if they were constantly phasing in and out of reality. Even after Kushina's lips left his cheek, Naruto could still feel the intense presence of love and care. Naruto ripped his mother's vision away and put his father in its place. He put his hand lightly on Naruto's hair and extended his arm, saying, goodbye Naruto. Now your mother and I can rest knowing you'll be safe. Minato withdrew his hand from Naruto's hair as he rustled his silky, soft hair, making Naruto wince in shame. As your mother said, we love you, and we know you'll do what it takes to do the right thing. With a tiny tear running from his eye, Naruto questioned, I'll never see you guys again, will I? He wiped the tear away quickly. Kushina softly answered, we'll be with you Naruto, and we'll always be watching over you. Naruto's parents had vanished from view before he could pose another query. Astonished by what had just transpired, Naruto sat in the garden. Still uncertain as to whether or not what had just transpired was a figment of his imagination, he played the exchange over and over in his head. He came to the conclusion quickly. What had just transpired was reality. Still incredulous at the enormity of it all, he shook his head violently and asked, so, are you done? Naruto was startled by Kurama's loud voice and jumped to his feet, saying, I'll take that as a yes. The garden suddenly changed into Kurama's lair, and Naruto had to give his eyes time to adjust to the overwhelming darkness. So, I assume you listened to our conversation? HMPH, not even close, I allowed you your privacy. It was the least I could do, given that you haven't met your parents prior to that encounter. Kurama responded. Naruto started seeing through the shadows. So what did you talk about? He asked, opening one eye expectantly as he saw Kurama in his typical pose, lying across the floor with his arms folded under his chin. I don't want to talk about it, I still can't believe it was real, that it really happened, said Naruto. Well you better believe it Naruto. What just happened was real, and there's no way to deny it. Kurama responded briefly. Kurama asked, so then, are you still as determined as ever to control my power? As he yawned to himself and refused to move his hand to cover his mouth, he remained lying down on the harsh and cold floor. The words, I, were difficult for Naruto to finish. He was enveloped in a cloud of surprise and incredulity. After tapping his foot on the ground a few times to calm himself, he said, yes, I still want to control your powers. Naruto stopped tapping and walked slowly in the direction of the cage. HMPH, even after that encounter, you're still as bold as ever. Kurama hissed softly, still failing to get up from his current position, and stopped just inches from the cage before starting to leave to the seal on the cage. Kisame spoke of something I may encounter while Naruto lost his train of thought, causing Kurama to sigh in confusion. Anyway, Kisame said I may encounter something called my dark self. What does that mean exactly? Kurama moaned, knowing that Naruto was only postponing the inevitable. Naruto placed his hand carefully on the delicate seal and said, before I do anything, I have a question. Kurama chuckled to himself, your dark self, yes, that would be the case, if you had a dark self of course. So, you're saying I don't have one? Kurama responded, laughing to himself, you just skipped the step of defeating your dark self. I never said that. You must be at the waterfall of truth to face your dark self, and I'm sure we're not in that location. Naruto mockingly questioned, so, I still have to confront my dark self then? You're being a little too vague, don't you think? It would make controlling my powers easier, but apart from that, there is no real concern, unless of course the darkness builds up inside you, and ultimately consumes you. This new knowledge caused Naruto to inhale several times. He carefully removed the cage's seal, letting the doors swing violently open. The metal doors clanged against the brick walls, and Naruto jumped back. After a few moments of stunned silence, Naruto asked in his bewildered state, "Are you not going to attack me?" Kurama said simply, still not moving, "No." The room fell silent for another moment before Kurama succinctly stated, "I'm not going to stop you from controlling my power. In fact, I want you to control my power, and I want to help you in doing this." At Kurama's abrupt outburst, Naruto guffawed noisily. "You want to help me control you?" Naruto screamed, assuming Kurama was lying. "How foolish do you think I am?" Naruto asked. "I don't think you're foolish, Naruto. Boy. I want to help you in your mission, and this is the only way I can do it." "And why are you so determined to help me?" With his sharp claws scratching the ground, Kurama slowly got up from where he was and stood on all fours. Naruto clenched his teeth and said, "Because of what I've seen you do." Naruto sarcastically retorted, "You're all about being extremely vague today, aren't you, Kurama? Before your father died, when I brought chaos upon Konoha, there was a certain man, a man of incalculable strength." Naruto asked, his curiosity overwhelming him, "Uchiha Madara?" "Precisely. He had complete control over me. He forced me to attack Konoha, something I did not wish to do. Your father, Namikaze Minato, managed to sever the tie that Madara had with me, allowing me to regain control over myself. I never did thank him for that." With an extremely coarse tone, Naruto yelled, "HMPH, you expect me to believe you all of a sudden? Why are you telling me this anyway? You're just avoiding my question, aren't you?" "Please be quiet." Kurama growled. "When your father sealed me inside of you, it killed him and your mother. I'm sure you already know this." Naruto scowled at Kurama's sudden change in attitude. "Before he passed away, your father had one request for me. A request I've been abiding by ever since I could." Naruto nodded. "A request? To make my life miserable? Because you've done that exceptionally well," Naruto murmured. "His wish was simple, to protect you with all of my power." Astonished by the information he had just been given, Naruto froze in place. The Nine Tails domain was silent for several minutes. "So all those times you've aided me, healed me, and gave me your chakra, that was all to protect me?" came the question. The Kyuubi laughed quietly. "Exactly, everything I've done, regardless of how others may perceive them, has all been for you. And now, the only way I can help you is if I willingly give you full control of my powers." "So you wouldn't have done all of those things had it not been for my father?" asked Naruto, laughing quietly to himself. "No, not at first anyway." Naruto raised an eyebrow in bewilderment before scratching his left cheek sheepishly. "Even when your father had asked me to protect you, I was reluctant at first. It took me a while, 4 years to be precise, before I wanted to protect you. You, how should I say, grew on me." Kurama grinned when he saw Naruto's shocked expression. "What's wrong? You don't believe me?" Kurama laughed. "No, it's not that, it's just that, all this time, I believed, that you were pure evil, and that you weren't capable of compassion or even trust. HMPH, even a powerful and intelligent individual such as you can be easily blinded by the actuality of certain events. You're not like my other containers, Naruto. Boy, you deeply care for others. I know this because I've seen it in your actions. That Hinata girl, you're fond of her, aren't you?" Naruto blushed deeply, the red blood coursing through supple cheeks. "I digress. The other Jinchurikis that acted as my vessels were cold-hearted individuals, who wanted nothing more than to watch me perish. Your mother was the exception. Maybe the trait of kindness is present in the Uzumaki clan. You, on the other hand, were always kind, even when others shunned you out because of me. You even retained that some of that kindness in regards to me, something not one of my previous vessels even contemplated. So what are you trying to say?" After a brief pause, I said, "You know exactly what I'm saying, Naruto. Boy. So then, you know what happens next?" "No, I don't. I'm still a bit mystified at what it is you truly want." "I want to give you control over my power, and then I want to train you so that you can utilize this newly acquired power to its full potential." "Is that what you truly want?" "It is, and you and I both know it's what you want." After giving the situation some thought, Naruto said, "If I agree to this," picking his next words carefully, "how do I know you won't try something malicious?" "Because you know I won't do that, Naruto. Boy. You've been with them long enough. If I really wanted to hurt you in any way, I would have done it years ago, when you were more vulnerable and naive. Naruto exhaled forcefully after taking a slow breath of all the oxygen he could contain. Okay. He tapped his fingertips on the side of his leg and said, okay. Again, raising the volume. With a soft nod, he said, I'll take your power. Are you sure you can handle it? I will be injecting a significant amount of power within you. Even Uchiha Madara struggled controlling the power I hold. I'm ready. Go, Kurama. After letting out a soft sigh, Kurama let out a stream of bloodshot chakra. Knowing that the next few minutes would not be pleasant, Naruto swallowed. As though it had a life of its own, the chakra started to move. It shot in Naruto's direction, swallowing him whole. The chakra caused Naruto to scream and grimace in pain as it pierced through his soft belly. More shrieks of agony came from Naruto's vocal cords as the long stream of chakra continued to seep from Kurama and enter Naruto. Surprisingly, the flow of chakra stopped, and Kurama and Naruto fell to the ground in utter exhaustion, gasping for air as they tried to replenish their lungs. After gasping multiple times, Naruto turned to face Kurama and stumbled to speak, barely raising his voice above a whisper, W. What the fuck just happened? He was out of breath again. I am weak right now. Giving you my power was no easy task, and neither was receiving it. You have done well, Naruto. Boy. Kurama said simply, while a great deal of pain raced through his body. I have just given you all of my power. Naruto ignored Kurama's compliment and kept gasping for air, adding, like I said, even Uchiha Madara struggled to receive this power. Naruto sensed that something was off at that precise moment. Astonished at how light he felt, he stood up. He noticed that his hands were covered in a bright yellow layer of chakra. Examining the rest of his body, he saw that it was being consumed by the same layer of chakra. Kurama, Naruto whispered, still studying himself, what is going on? What's all this chakra around me? Kurama laughed to himself, still too weak to do anything. This is awesome, Naruto screamed, forming a Rasengan in his right palm. The blanket of chakra danced around Naruto's skin, looking something like fire. Within seconds, the Rasengan comes to life. Then, in his left palm, Naruto created another Rasengan and made them both larger. Then he wrapped a casing of wind around the Rasengans, and Kurama grinned admiringly. In less than 3 seconds, Naruto created this new jutsu, which sent a shiver of pride and excitement through his body. Wow, was all he could manage to say before he quickly dismissed his jutsu. You've already accomplished something in just 20 seconds, Kurama muttered with pride in his voice. So, what are you going to call that jutsu? It seemed like it would be a threat to any ninja stupid enough to stand in your way. Naruto started running wildly across the room. Nearly matching his father's speed, he ran to the other end of the room and back in less than a second. If I can combine it with this speed, Naruto whispered to himself as he hurried around the room once more with uncharacteristically high speed. In less than a second, he moved across the room once more. With ease, he created 2 enormous Rasengans in each hand, then infused one with fire and the other with wind. Naruto made a shadow clone of himself and instructed his clone, go to the other side of the room, and be ready for this. After giving a nod, the clone fled. The clone stopped suddenly and waved to Naruto, indicating that he was prepared. The clone couldn't keep up with Naruto's incredible speed, and Naruto turned into a yellow blur in its eyes. In an instant, Naruto emerged in front of the clone and rammed both Rasengans into the clone's body. Because of Naruto's incredible speed, the clone was unable to predict the attack, allowing the devastating attack to connect with the defenseless clone. When the wind and fire clashed, an even more powerful attack was unavoidably launched. The wind element gave the fire element the opportunity to increase in power and size, effectively destroying the clone with ease. When the smoke cleared, Naruto laughed to himself because there was nothing there. Kurama said softly, Naruto. Boy, your strength has grown beyond my expectations. Before turning to Kurama, Naruto swiftly sheathed the golden chakra around his body. But you won't be able to master my power with just clones. Naruto laughed, but said nothing else. We must train sooner rather than later, Naruto. Boy. Before we do anything like that, Naruto said, interrupting Kurama as politely as possible. He approached Kurama, halted a few meters from him, and said, I want to thank you for everything you've done for me. Kurama blushed a little and covered his face from Naruto's view. HMPH, now all of a sudden you're thanking me? Almost 2 months ago you despised of me. Naruto yelled, Nani, why can't you just take a simple, thank you? Kurama then lifted a fist and held it tenderly in front of Naruto's face. With a perplexed look on his face, Naruto said, what the? It's a show of respect between us tailed beasts. We only fist bump those who we respect to the full extent. When Naruto saw Kurama's angry face, he laughed to himself. So in other words, you've never done this before, have you? Kurama laughed to himself after the calming sound of Naruto's laughter rushed past his ears. Baka, don't make such foolish remarks like that, he said. Naruto slowly raised his fist in the air and gave Kurama's fist a light tap. Kurama and Naruto both grinned with ecstatic delight. Hinata became enlightened by the sun's warmth and was able to relax. As she slowly glanced around, she saw that a number of the villagers had stopped to stare at her, their faces showing concern. Hinata had neglected to change her blood-soaked clothing, allowing the villagers to witness the suffering she had endured. Disregarding the opinions of the villagers, she shrugged and headed for the Hokage's office. She concluded that the main street of Konoha was the most convenient and expedient way to get to the Hokage's office. Hinata made her way to the crowded streets. Finding her way to Konoha's main street took Hinata a few minutes. Since it was the quickest way to get to the Hokage's office, she decided that the information she needed to give the elders outweighed the chance that the villagers would notice her blood-soaked clothing. She kept moving forward, avoiding any opportunity to strike up a conversation by marching slowly past the numerous villagers in her path. Hinata kept walking when she saw a figure in the distance who seemed to always follow her. "Hi, Hinata. Chan." The figure screamed, piercing Hinata's sensitive eardrums. Hinata's patience was running very low, so she spoke quickly. "Anyo, Ino. Chan. What is it?" She didn't want to talk to anyone, especially anyone in the Rookie 8. "Wow, Hinata. What's with all the blood? What happened to you?" Ino asked, putting on a false smile as she did so. Seeing that Hinata's expression changed, Ino decided it would be best to avoid asking such questions during their conversation. "Hey, never mind. What happens in your time is none of my business, right?" Ino asked quickly. "It's my own business, of course," Hinata thought sourly. "So Ino-chan, what is it? I'm kind of in a rush." Hinata took a deep breath to try to calm herself down. She winced silently at the throbbing pain that was still in her ribs. Gently, she lifted her left hand and grasped her fractured ribs. Ino abruptly stopped smiling and said, "I need to talk with you in regards to the discussion you had with Sakura and Kiba." Immediately, Ino's voice became serious, as though the outcome of this conversation depended on it. Hinata let out an incredulous sigh. "We shouldn't do this here then," Hinata shakily replied, her anger quickly ebbing away as fear crept into the depths of her feelings. She had hoped that she would never discuss this subject again, at least not with anyone who wasn't the elders. Turning her head to the side to align her vision with Hinata's sleek figure, Ino pointed to a narrow alleyway across the street and said, "Nobody uses that alleyway. It's a perfect place to talk. What are you waiting for?" Ino said solemnly. After giving an erratic nod, Hinata painfully walked behind Ino. Hinata scanned the area quickly, searching for anything unusual. Though she was only able to see her own and Ino's chakra signals, she silently activated her Byakugan. In just a few seconds, the two were crossing the street, avoiding and waving past different villagers along the way. To make sure no one was observing, Ino glanced over her shoulder and to both sides. She stepped into the dark, narrow alleyway once she was sure it was just her and Hinata. Fearful and anxious, Hinata remained glued to the alley's entrance. Ino quickly gestured for Hinata to follow her after turning to face her. Gulping, Hinata realized that Ino wanted to do more than talk. Reluctantly, she walked into the alley, still holding her ribs carefully. When she caught up to Ino, Hinata whispered, "Anyo, Ino-chan, can't we speak here?" With a tone that was almost emotionless, Ino answered, "No, we'll walk until we reach the middle of the alley. We'll talk once we get there." "Who's waiting for us up ahead?" Hinata said, her voice hardly audible above a whisper, as she swallowed again, her numerous thoughts frightening her. Ino walked on despite turning her head. Before answering Hinata's question, Ino gave herself permission to smile a little. "It's just us two. The Hokage specifically requested me to talk with you. Nobody else will be there." Ino snapped her vision away from Hinata and turned to face the future. Every now and then, Hinata glanced over her shoulder quickly, her anxiety rapidly gnawing at her. Her heart started to beat more erratically than usual, her breathing became deeper and faster, and she felt confined, her horror pushing her into a dark corner. Hinata felt scared. She was terrified of what Ino would say or probably do. She was also afraid of her father, but she was most afraid of the Hokage and his corrupt schemes. For years, Hinata had allowed her fear to fester inside of her, growing stronger and stronger without ever letting it go. Every day, Hinata promised herself that she would take action to address her fears, but she was never brave enough to do so. Ino-chan, Hinata muttered, deciding that today would be the day she faced her fears. She shook her head, embarrassed by the overwhelming fear in her voice. Ino-chan, Hinata whispered again, louder than before, Ino-chan. She managed to speak at her normal volume, but it was ineffective. Ino-chan, she screamed, symbolically pushing her fear aside as she did so. The sudden explosion of volume caused Ino to jump a little in surprise. With a chilly and uncaring look on her face, Ino slowly turned to Hinata. Ino-chan, what do you want with me? Hinata asked, feeling her constant fear slowly but firmly return. If you've taken me all the way here to have me killed, then, Hinata started to lose her voice due to the constant fear that was raging in her emotions. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. I'm not going to kill you, Hinata. I just need to explain to you the gravity of the situation, and I need to ask you to take on a mission. Ino quickly clarified. As she glanced around, she caught a glimpse of a spotless bench. Now, Ino said as Hinata lowered herself gently onto the seat, you understand how important it is that we keep this conversation, and any conversation you've had prior to this one, to yourself. You are not to tell a soul what I'm about to tell you. She sat gracefully on the cozy wooden bench and motioned for Hinata to sit next to her. Good. Now then, the Hokage has asked me to inform you that we were running with the plan to purify Kano. Hinata nodded her head precariously, her nerves running extremely thin. Hinata abruptly interrupted, Anyo, asking in a low voice, who's we, you, Sakura, Kiba, and the Hokage? Ino shrugged to herself, there's more of us than that, to which Hinata gave her a perplexed look. The entire rookie 9 or 8 since Sasuke left Konoha. When Hinata heard about the people assisting the 6th, her mouth dropped a few inches. Don't worry, Ino said, I meant to say the rookie 7. Naruto doesn't even know any of this is happening. Ino grinned at Hinata as though she had read her mind. With a chilling shiver running down Hinata's spine, Ino said coldly, the Hokage knows that Kakashi and the elders have their questions and assumptions that he murdered the 5th. He has that kind of perception. He's planning on killing them as well. They can't be allowed to ruin anything. Ino hissed softly. Hinata's fragile body was flooded with relief. Hinata vigorously whispered, matching Ino's volume, but maybe the 6th is wrong. Maybe Kakashi. Sama and the elders don't know anything, she said. Before slowly shaking her head, Ino guffawed to herself, saying, no, we can't allow them to live, it's too much of a risk if they're alive. In an attempt to persuade Ino to reconsider, Hinata swiftly challenged, but they're just assumptions. None of the other ninjas will listen to them if they can't provide proof for their accusations. No, the Hokage would kill us as well if I even mentioned what you just suggested. Do you realize how foolish it is to disagree with the Hokage? Do you even know who he is? Ino thought for a few moments before violently shaking her head in disagreement with Hinata. Of course you don't. Nobody but me does. Ino muttered bitterly to herself as Hinata sat motionless for a few seconds. Who is the Hokage? Nobody has ever seen him, and when they do, he always covers his face with a distinctive mask. Hinata steadied her breathing in anticipation of the following questions. Hinata pressed harder and harder for a response. Ino-chan, you have to tell me, Ino said, ignoring Hinata's pointless inquiries. Hinata jumped to her feet in disbelief as Ino yelled, no, if I tell you, it will ruin the entire plan. When the Hokage is ready to tell you his true identity, he will tell you. Ino came to this conclusion. After letting her heart settle back into its regular rhythm, Hinata said, all I can tell you is that the rookie 8 excluding Naruto know about the plan to cleanse Konoha. She then went back to the bench. More like demolish, Hinata reflected. In response to Ino's explanation, Hinata nodded. And that the Hokage is planning on slaughtering Kakashi and the elders before they obtain any form of proof. Then there's the matter of the mission the Hokage has assigned you to complete, Ino said softly. Hinata asked aloud, mission? What mission, Ino-chan? Hinata turned her bewilderment toward Ino. The Hokage wants you to eliminate any and all threats to our cause, starting with Uzumaki Naruto. After a few minutes of silence during which Hinata was traumatized by what she had just heard, the death of the very person she holds dear in this world, Ino shot Hinata a look of pure menace and delight. Her pupils widened and several tears started to fall. Hinata, you can't let emotions cloud your judgment. Hinata snapped her head in Ino's direction, ignoring the tears that slithered down her cheeks and refusing to wipe away the salty residue that remained on her soft cheeks after the teardrops crashed to the floor. Naruto is a danger to us and our cause. You know it as well as the Hokage and I do. He is reckless and unpredictable, and he won't hesitate to protect Konoha. If we tell him of our plan, he will go to the elders. Ino said solemnly before coughing softly as his sleek figure engulfed Hinata's blurred vision and more tears started to flow from Hinata's eyes. No, Hinata whispered softly, shaking her head slowly to block out the horrifying request that she would never be able to fulfill. Hinata, you know you have to. He can't be allowed tea, Ino said, gently placing her hand on her hesitant shoulder. As she pushed Ino's hand away from her shoulder, Hinata screamed, "No, I refuse to be a part of this any longer," and leapt to her feet. Ino shook her head purposefully and silently, saying, "You can't make me do anything this malicious." Hinata found it difficult to speak as her anger started to radiate from her. After giving Ino a sneer, Hinata hurried off from the bench and said, "If you walk away now, Hinata, I'll be obliged to kill you." Ino's harsh and emotionless remarks made Hinata stop moving. Hinata slowly turned to look at Ino before turning her face into a disgusted one. "You can give me all the glaring and hateful looks you want, Hinata-chan," Ino said with a quiet giggle. "But you know I'm speaking nothing but the truth. I will end your life." Ino leaned back on the bench, keeping both hands on her lap in a victorious stance. Ino then composedly repositioned herself on the bench, crossing her left leg over her right. As she slowly raised her left hand and motioned for Hinata to join her, Ino asked, "So what will it be?" Hinata stared at Ino, repulsed by her overwhelming joy, as if she enjoyed her suffering. Hinata turned her head and stared at the alleyway's exit. She shook her head, fully aware that Ino would either kill her or seriously hurt her. She cautiously marched back to Ino after tearing her vision from the exit. Upon Hinata's compliance, Ino grinned and said, "Now then, on to more pressing matters." Ino repositioned herself on the bench and asserted her authority, saying, "The Hokage would like for you to terminate Uzumaki Naruto, tonight, no sooner and no later." Ino's harsh tone sent a shiver down Hinata's spine. "I trust you can fulfill this request. It would be a shame if a certain member of your family had to suffer for your mistakes." Ino cackled demonically before flashing a sinister smile. With horror, Hinata's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare. I don't think you fully grasp the gravity of this situation. You clearly underestimate the power and influence that the Sixth possess. If you try and evade your duties, there will be severe consequences, and not just to you, but to your family." Ino pulled closer to Hinata's confused self. "How is Hanabi doing anyway?" Ino asked, placing her face a few inches from Hinata's. Hinata's jaw dropped a few centimeters in shock at Ino's audacious and ruthless inquiry. Hinata immediately moves away from Ino, putting distance between them. Then she held up an open hand and swung it hard at Ino's face. Ino foresaw Hinata's move and quickly deflected her ferocious strike, squeezing Hinata's fragile wrist. "One way or another, Naruto will be eliminated," Ino said in a rough voice, "and if you want yourself and your family to suffer utter torment, then be my guest to disregard the Hokage's appeal. But if you care about yourself and your family, then you will listen to me, and you will slay Naruto." Hinata grunted as Ino tightened her grip on her wrist. "Now, are you going to do it?" Hinata asked, holding her aching wrist in her other hand and holding it close to her heart. After a few moments of silence, Hinata nodded her head unsteadily and begged, Hi, just don't hurt my family." Tears were streaming from her shocked and anguished eyes. Expecting their conversation to go this far, Ino sighed. I don't want to hurt Naruto-kun, Hinata muttered to herself in a low voice. When Ino saw a couple strolling down the alleyway, she decided it would be best to end the conversation. "You won't be hurting him. If you kill him now, it will be swift and painless." Ino concluded casually, then leaned back on the bench. "If you don't do it, the Hokage will, and it won't be anywhere near as painless as you can make it." Then, turning to Hinata, she said, "There's just one more thing you must know that will change your view on joining us." Ino said, "I mentioned before that nobody knows who the Hokage really is apart from me. He requested for me to inform you of his true identity in the hopes that you would consider his proposal to join is." Hinata sniveled, then nodded her head gently. When the couple passed Ino and Hinata, Ino was forced to say, almost in a whisper, "Orochimaru." Without waiting for Hinata's response, Ino turned her back to her again and hurried out the door. Ino grew farther away from Hinata until he was fully engrossed in the alleyway's shadows. For a few minutes, Hinata remained seated on the bench, bewildered and overcome by the news she had just been given. Orochimaru is the Hokage. That can't be. Ino must have bluffed to scare me into joining them, she thought to herself as uncertainty started to creep in. But what if she's telling me the truth? She pondered for many minutes before coming to the conclusion, I will not discuss this with anyone, not even the elders. She thought to herself once more. As she glanced around, she saw that the sky was growing darker by the second. Presuming that evening was drawing swiftly, she rose from her chair, her characteristic tears refusing to go away. She started walking toward the end of the alleyway after carefully wiping the tears from her cheeks and under her aching eyes. She kept her guard up and looked around cautiously all the time. She refused to be surprised by another encounter. In less than a few minutes, she arrived at the end of the alley and cautiously peered down both sides of the street. There were few people on the street, which was unusual in Konoha. Hinata swallowed, aware that the villagers were hiding in their homes, their terror taking over, but she had no idea what was causing their fear. The elders were the only people Hinata knew who would resist the Hokage's impending corruption, so she chose to ignore the deserted street and resumed her interrupted journey to them. Someone higher up needed to know what was happening. The cold air blew past her as she walked down the dark street, making her shudder as a chilling sensation danced across her smooth body. Hinata experienced a sharp throb of pain in her lower chest and then, using a delicate hand, grasped the point where the pain protruded before kneeling and giving in to the overwhelming pain. She was relieved to see that the Hokage Tower was just a few moments away when she looked up. In agony, Hinata straightened up and proceeded to the tower. The sixth surveyed the blood-stained room slowly. The Hokage let the sickly smell of warm blood fill his nostrils as he breathed slowly through his nose. As he grew increasingly seduced by the foul scent, he trembled with joy and excitement. He rubbed his exposed wound with his index finger while glancing down at his injured body. The Hokage's long tongue fell out of his mouth, sending thick strands of saliva down its lengths as the sight and feel of the blood captivated him. A characteristic drip sound soon followed as the saliva dropped to the ground. The Hokage was startled out of his reverie by the unexpected dribble. The Hokage ripped his vision from his fingers and used the back of his hand to slowly wipe away the extra saliva that had gathered around his mouth. Warm blood smeared across his left cheek as his index finger lightly touched it, causing a sensational explosion to erupt throughout his body. He took a deep, nervous breath in silence, the ferocious joy growing in intensity by the moment. He quickly pushed this emotion aside and kept looking around the edges of the blood-stained room. Crimson blood spattered the entire room, tiny pieces of bone were strewn on the damp carpet, and remnants of skin and brain tissue were plastered on the walls. The Hokage was thrilled with his creation and grinned. He looked down at his victims' corpses, his sly smile only getting bigger by the moment. The Hokage's volume stayed the same as he approached the elders remained slowly. "You knew this was coming," he said softly to the corpses, "it was only a matter of time before you had to be eliminated. You were too big a threat to my cause. I would like to say that this could have been avoided, but then I'd only be lying to you," he said in a spiteful whisper as he leaned slowly closer to Kaharu's ear, his lips just inches from touching the decomposing ear. He then got up from his crouch and carefully brushed off the dust that had accumulated on his clothes. Slowly, the Hokage inspected the elder's visible wounds. He recalled the moment he killed the elder. He licked his lips slowly as he remembered the warm blood that trickled down the lengths of both his arms and how easily the sharp kunai pierced the skulls of both elders. His slimy tongue dripping saliva onto his smooth lips only served to intensify his feelings. With haste, he turned to his desk. The Hokage was even more pleased to see Kakashi's body. The Hokage approached Kakashi's body slowly. "And don't think I've forgotten about you, Kakashi. Sama," he said as he approached Kakashi. "If only you had joined us, you would still be alive," he said, stopping a few inches from Kakashi and crouching to get as close as he could. The Hokage laughed to himself shortly after he finished speaking. "No, you know just as well as I do that I would have still killed you. There is no such thing as avoiding the inevitable." The Hokage whispered again, barely raising his voice above a breath. "I'm sure your father would be disappointed if he knew how you died. He would want you to have passed away a warrior, not a sacrifice," the Hokage sarcastically said, clenching Kakashi's hair violently with his hand as he sighed to himself and stroked his silver locks. "You should have stayed out of my way, and I may have spared you." The Hokage threw Kakashi's motionless head at the desk, causing a sickening thud and the characteristic crack of bone. Kakashi's lifeless head drooped around as the Hokage cruelly shook his hand. The Hokage stood up again, taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly. He walked slowly around his desk and sat down on the vacant seat, which was one of the few things left in the office that wasn't covered in blood. The sound of blood dripping from open wounds filled the Hokage's ears as he looked across the room once more. Just then, there was a sudden knock on the door. The Hokage stopped watching his office and stared at the door. "Come in, it's open," the Hokage said softly, already recognizing the person at the door. You might want to be more careful when opening my door, Chan. The Hokage said sarcastically, grinning, as the wooden door flew open and suddenly struck Homura's skull, causing thick spurts of blood to fly across the door. With a calm expression on her face, Ino leaned over and carefully wiped away the warm blood that splashed all over her. Ino bowed to the Hokage and said, "Sorry, Hokage. Sama." She got back up and walked through the door, slamming it shut behind her. When she finished bowing, the sixth motioned for her to stop. Then Ino stood up straight. "Couldn't you have been more efficient with these defectors?" Ino asked, kicking Kaharu's arm gently away from the entrance as she started to walk and stumbled on the elder's outstretched limbs. With both hands on the table, the Hokage said, "If you were here, you would understand why I had to get rid of them so quickly. They were 3-1. If I had taken my time and had been as efficient as you say, they would have killed me. Plus, it was fun being as reckless as I was," he said, smiling to himself. "Now then, Ino-chan, what information do you have regarding that matter we spoke of?" the Hokage asked, raising his arms and letting his elbows rest on the smooth table. Making a fist out of his right hand, he inserted it into his left palm. As she approached the Hokage, Ino stated, "I can also tell you that the scouts managed to find Guy-sensei and his team several miles from Konoha passed out. They're being treated at the hospital as we speak." The Hokage sighed in frustration at Guy's incapacity, adding, "Finally, the scouts found a camp that they believed to be Naruto and Hinata's, but it was abandoned. It seemed Naruto and Hinata left the camp several days before the scouts found it." Ino was inches from the desk, placing both hands on its edge. Ino nodded in agreement as the Hokage sternly warned, "I want you to gather the remaining genins, including Guy's team, and hunt for Naruto and Hinata." That is, unfortunate that Guy couldn't listen to instructions, he thought to himself, but at least we have a lead on Naruto and Hinata. We must deal with that problem before it becomes out of our power to control. "So you want me to inform Team Guy of the plan to cleanse Konoha?" Ino asked. "Just the team. I want you to deal with Guy, to make sure Lee, Neji and Ten understand that our cause needs to be taken with the utmost seriousness." Hokage. "Sama, you're not thinking rationally about this. If I eliminate Guy, the team will be reluctant to help us. They will inform someone of our betrayal." Ino spoke softly. "I've already taken that into account, and it won't happen. Once they see what you are capable of, they will be terrified, and will join you in fear of death. They're only impressionable children, Ino." The Hokage made it clear. In search of a clearer response, Ino asked, "How would you like me to dispose of Guy-sensei then?" After a brief pause to think about how he wanted the message to be perceived by the genin, the Hokage said, "I need for the genins to understand that I am severe about this proposal. They need to fear us before they'll accept our offer. You must make Guy's death as disturbing and terrifying as you possibly can. Only then will their horror control them. I don't need to tell you what to do if they are reluctant to join you still. I'll eliminate them too if they refuse to join us," Ino said with a gentle nod. "Good." The Hokage replied with a smile, "You will do this no later than tonight, and you will head out to search for Naruto and Hinata 2 days from now, with Neji. Locating their current chakra locations will be an easy task," the Hokage clarified. "Consider it done, Hokage." "Sama." The Hokage stopped in the middle of his sentence when his memory returned to him, saying, "I forgot she was killed." He whispered to himself, "Call Shino. His bugs can devour the bodies, leaving no trace behind." Ino nodded eagerly. "There's one more thing I need you to do for me before you deal with Guy. I need you to dispose of these 3 corpses before anyone else finds them. Get soccer." After taking her hands off the table's edge, Ino turned to look at the door. "Make sure you take care of this, Ino. They either join us, or they die." The Hokage reiterated Ino's goal as she started to walk. When Ino arrived at the door, she put her hand lightly on the handle, the cool metal cradling her tender hand. The door unlocked as Ino applied pressure to the handle. The door swung open when she pulled. After leaving through the open door, Ino firmly shut it behind her. Ino sighed to herself as she sagged on the now closed door. Although she was aware that the Hokage would soon ask her to kill someone, she never imagined it would be a Junin. She pushed herself away from the door and proceeded down the hall, each step making an odd squelch in her boots. After only a few seconds, Ino arrived at the end of the hallway and saw the steep stairs. In haste to fulfill the request the Hokage had given her, she hurried down the stairs. After descending the squeaky wooden stairs, she noticed that there were no guards, which was unusual. She glanced around quickly, but she couldn't find another soul. To keep her thoughts on what was going to happen tonight, she shrugged and asked, "Why did he have to pick me as his errand, girl?" As she pushed open the front gate and saw the streets of Konoha, Ino thought bitterly. She left her present thoughts behind and headed for the Aburame home. The Hokage had imposed a curfew to prevent further corruption in the streets, but the streets of Konoha were in ruins. Ino kept walking, with the night's silence serving as her sole companion. She started thinking about what she was thinking now. When she and the other genins happened to run into Naruto and Hinata, she wondered how she would respond. The Hokage would want Naruto disposed of immediately, and Hinata, I don't know what he'd do to Hinata, she said. Hinata doesn't deserve to live after what she told the elders. Her family should pay that price as well. Ino concluded after a few moments of contemplation, I want to be the one that Hinata last sees, and I want to be the one that tells her that her sister and father had both met, unfortunate ends. I'm sure he'll accept her in his new civilized village if he hasn't already murdered her family. Within minutes, Ino arrived at the Aburame home. She put her thoughts aside and ascended the short stairs to Shino's residence. As Ino glanced around, she saw that one of the lights in the bedroom, most likely Shino's, was still on. Shino? Ino whispered, Shino? She went to the door and knocked softly. After a moment of silence, Ino heard a loud clatter behind the door. Unsure of who would answer the door, she jumped back. In an effort to blend in, Ino whispered, the Hokage has called for you. You need to get there now. The door silently opened to reveal a fully clothed figure. Shino, is that you? The figure asked, nodding without opening his mouth to speak. You need to clean up the mess the Hokage left behind. Ino whispered, her volume drastically lowering so that Shino could hardly hear her, and Shino nodded once more before leaving the room and shutting the door behind him. Shino observed that Ino was different. As though she had heard or done something she didn't want, she was extremely stressed. Ino, what's the matter with you? Shino asked, matching Ino's volume. Ino swiftly responded, denying Shino knowledge of the assignment, nothing. I just need you to get to the Hokage's office before anyone else does. Shino. With a gentle nod, Shino said, hi, I'll get over there right away. In response to Ino's barrage of inquiries, Shino nodded. Good. The Hokage will tell you exactly what to do. He needs you to be discreet about your duties. I'll meet up with you at your house later, okay? Ino sighed to herself. With a small smile and a sigh of relief, Ino said, good. She motioned for Shino to leave. Following her orders, Shino strode past Ino and proceeded in the direction of the Hokage's tower. As Shino strode off into the distance, Ino watched. In order to grant the Hokage's wish, Ino left the Aburame residence as well, heading toward the hospital by turning left rather than right. Itachi started to pace the living room as his anxiety and fear took over. In the hopes that Hinata and Naruto would return, he looked out the windows every other minute. Where are they? Itachi asked himself as he walked more quickly around the living room. Kisame was sleeping when he heard his foot tapping loudly on the floorboard, which made him moan. As he continued to move around the living room, Itachi kicked the sofa Kisame was sleeping on, causing him to wake up. Wake up Kisame, you've been asleep long enough, Itachi cried. To Itachi's chagrin, Kisame stretched and yawned before swinging his legs to the ground and saying, that's the third time you've woken me up Itachi. You know I don't like it when you do that. Kisame yawned once more. Ignoring Kisame's foolish remarks, Itachi kept pacing the living room in worry, saying, it's been almost 4 hours since Hinata left, and she still isn't back yet. I specifically informed her to get back in less than 2 hours. Something may have happened to her and Naruto. Itachi scolded Kisame right away, saying, hey, I was only joking. Fucking hell Itachi. Lighten up would, ya? Kisame scratched the back of his neck while still yawning. Kisame moaned at the sound of Itachi's concern, saying, not this again. I've already told you that both Naruto and Hinata are old enough to take care of themselves. If anything, they're probably having sex. Kisame jumped a little when Itachi yelled, you know how old they are. Making those kinds of jokes is just erroneous. It wasn't a very well thought out joke, was it Kisame? Why are you being so fucking protective? I already said I was sorry, what more do you want? Look, it's early, I'm tired. I barely got any sleep last night. I wasn't thinking when I said that. Kisame gently placed his hand on his chest. Seriously Itachi, I'm sorry I said that. After glaring at Kisame for a few seconds, Itachi let his shoulders drop and let his arms swing freely before saying, it's okay. I'm making some breakfast. You want anything to eat Itachi? Kisame exclaimed, leaping up from the couch with excitement. Well, I'm glad that's sorted out. For a few moments, Itachi gazed at Kisame with a bewildered look on his face. Breakfast you say? I'm sure you've neglected to look at the time. It's almost 6 p.m. Itachi pointed at the wall clock after tearing his vision away from Kisame. When he looked at the clock, Kisame asked, I've been asleep that long. Then I'll make breakfast and then start some dinner. Kisame exclaimed with joy as he walked politely to the kitchen. Seriously Itachi, do you want anything to eat? Kisame asked, opening the door and entering the room with grace. When you worry like that, you starve yourself. You know that's not healthy. Kisame said from behind the kitchen door, his voice drowning out the loud sound of boiling water. Itachi quickly responded, Kisame, I'm fine. He was looking out the window, waiting for Naruto and Hinata to arrive. Suit yourself then, more for me. In an attempt to calm his anxiety, Itachi started to wander around the living room again and whispered to himself, Baka. In less than an hour, Ino reached the hospital. She inhaled deeply and told herself, you can do this, Ino. Orochimaru wouldn't have given you this request if he didn't think you could do it. After she had finished calming herself, Ino gave herself a little smile and started up the short stairs to the front door. Ino shuddered in discomfort and cold from the wintry night breeze, which made her quicken her pace to the front door. After a few exhausting and freezing seconds, Ino arrived at the front door and quickly opened it, letting the hospital's sweltering hot air out. The warm air embraced her figure and Ino greeted it. Before entering the hospital, Ino let out a long sigh. She remained facing the door and shut the big double doors behind her. A smiling hospital staffer said, it's like a frosty wilderness out there, isn't it? As Ino shut the door, after examining Ino's clothing for a few moments, the young worker exclaimed, I'm surprised you haven't contracted hypothermia given what you're wearing. Once more with a cheerful tone and a constant smile on her face. Ino nodded in response to the employee's sincere question, so what brings you here today, Ino? Chan? She didn't want to strike up a conversation with anyone just yet. She needed to avoid any distractions. After turning to face the employee, Ino hurriedly explained, I'm looking for Team Guy. The Hokage asked me to deliver a message to them. With a quick glance at the patient list, the staff member said, oh, Team Guy. I don't think Team Guy are in a decent enough condition to be visited right now. They were only administered to the hospital 5 hours ago. After letting out a long sigh, Ino strode over to the counter and said, listen, looking at the worker's name tag. Shikora, she said. Ino calmly threatened, now I suggest you tell me where Guy can be found and step aside. Shikora grinned at Ino's courtesy, saying, the Hokage has informed me that this information is vital, and that Team Guy need to hear it. If you aren't allowing me to see them, then I'm afraid I'll have to report it to the Hokage, and you and I both know that he won't take this matter lightly, Ino calmly threatened. I know what the Hokage is capable of, Shikora said, pausing for a few moments to gather the right words. But nevertheless, Shikora retorted, hoping to regain control of the situation, I can't have anyone visit our patients if they aren't healthy enough for the visitation. Shikora looked Ino in the eyes and said, Ino. Chan, you'll have to come back in a week or so. Guy and his team sustained dire wounds, and they are in no condition to do anything right now. I'm sure the Hokage will find this a perfectly reasonable request. Ino let out another sigh to herself, her frustration starting to take over. Not understanding why this new information was useful, Ino slowly shook her head as she read the floor number and location on the wall behind her. Floor 1, reception. She then slowly glanced in every direction before realizing that she and Shikora were the only ones in the reception. Ino used this chance to intimidate Shikora into complying with her orders. Shikora jumped back in shock and confusion as Ino pugnaciously slammed a destructive fist into the counter. Shikora, we can do this one of two ways. Either you tell me where I can find Guy, or I'll kill you and find him myself. Ino threatened, her bloodlust growing by the moment. Alright Ino, your fun's over. Now stop threatening me like that, you're scaring me. Shikora thought Ino was pulling a sick practical joke on her, but then she saw Ino's savage face and said, Ino, stop it. Shikora started to cough and splutter, trying to say something, but Ino pulled her fist from the counter and put an open palm around her delicate neck, choking the young nurse. I did warn you, you moronic fool, and now I have to kill you because you took my threats as a joke. Oh, so now you want to tell me where I can find Guy. The moment I endanger your life is the moment you want to aid me in my personal goals. Ino concluded smugly as she relaxed her hold on Shikora's delicate neck. Many streams of tears poured out of Shikora's eyes, and she gasped for air for a few moments before whispering to herself, I don't want to die. From behind the counter, Ino raised her left hand and pushed it hard against Shikora's cheek. With a characteristic whack, Ino's palm made contact with Shikora's exposed cheek. Shikora stung her cheek with her delicate hand because the pain was so intense. You're not listening to me, Ino screamed, which made Shikora cry even harder. I just want to know where Guy is, and I'll let you go, it's as easy as that. If you don't tell me where he is, I'll murder you and everyone in this fucking hospital. Ino looked at Shikora and then put a sly smile on her face. So what will it be? It's no trouble for me to kill all of you pathetic weaklings. I haven't had blood bathe my hands in a long while. Ino took her hand off Shikura's neck, causing her to gasp and splutter for air. Shikura tried to relieve the pain that Ino's rage had caused by placing both of her hands across her neck. Before realizing that Ino was serious about everything she had just said, Shikura whimpered softly for a few seconds. H. 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 Hi, Ino. Chan. Team Gain are in our room 34. B. Shikura shakily replied, handing Ino a piece of paper with Team Guy's room as confirmation. Ino slowly made a fist with her right hand and asked, and what floor number would that be? Floor 3. Guy's room is on floor 3. Shikura's wide eyes started to well up with tears as she frantically responded to Ino's question after noticing his devastating fist right away. Shikura was paralyzed by her fear and failed to wipe away the tears. With a fake smile on her face, Ino muttered, "Thank you," and started to walk to Guy's room. On her way to room 34. B. Ino passed a number of employees, many of whom gave her threatening and hateful looks. Shikura must have told them about my behavior downstairs, Ino concluded as she made her way down the small hallways. Anyway, I'll be leaving soon. This Guy's situation shouldn't take long at all. Knowing full well that she yearned for corruption and bloodshed, and that Orochimaru had given it to her, Ino grinned to herself. I just hope Neji and the others join us. I don't want too much blood on my hands. Since her parents failed to provide for her needs and no one else in the village was aware of her disparity, Ino never imagined that anyone would comprehend her bloodlust. Before she met Orochimaru, she had always thought that her desire for blood would be something she would have to deal with during her lifetime and manage on her own. Perhaps because she was only 11 years old at the time, Ino did not perceive Orochimaru as the monster that all the ninjas had painted him as. Rather, she saw him as a father figure, a father she had never known. Ino had relived their chance encounter in her mind innumerable times, but it always made her heart race. On the outskirts of Konoha, Ino sat by herself, her delicate cheeks brushed by the autumn breeze. Following her father's repeated refusal to spend time with his daughter, Ino was once again made fun of by the other students at school for being different. When Ino was a little girl, her mother would take her to the outskirts of Konoha to gather herbs for the family meal, and she would sit there whenever she felt down. Her father had disposed of all of Ino's mother's belongings in order to distance himself and Ino from the agony of death, so it was the only recollection she had of her departed mother. But the loss of her mother had never made Ino sad. If anything, her mother's death taught her to value death. That was how Ino had always been. Death and blood, things that all children her age would find disconcerting and upsetting, had never affected her. Because she was unique and had different likes, dislikes, fears, and assurances than everyone else, the other children her age teased her. With her chin resting on her knees, Ino raised her tiny legs. She gathered what little warmth and comfort she could by wrapping her small arms around her legs. Ino started to recall how everyone had responded to her mother's funeral once more. At the time, Ino was perplexed by the cries and tears of everyone who had attended the funeral. Death, she had believed, was not something to be despised but rather celebrated. She could still clearly recall the numerous shocked and disgusted looks she got from both strangers and families when she tried to explain to them that her mother's passing was a reason to celebrate. After that day, her father's perception of her changed forever. It wasn't until the day of the funeral that Ino's father realized his daughter had something out of the ordinary. Ino recalled late night arguments between her mother and father about her, particularly about how she was different from the other children. Despite knowing that Ino was odd, her mother had always spoken well of her and protected her. Because of this, Ino loved her mother. She was compassionate, in contrast to her father, who treated her like a ferocious animal. Ino started removing the roots from the ground by slowly placing her left hand on the soft grass. Some villages frown upon hurting nature like that, little girl. A voice whispered behind her. With a quick leap to her feet, Ino spun around. Now just look how beautiful you are. How can a lady of such beauty defile nature like that? Ino's standard greeted her with a tall man with pale snowy skin and eccentric clothing. And what would your name be? He asked, bending down to meet Ino's eyes. With her cheeks burning with shame, Ino said, Ino. The tall man grinned at Ino and said, Ino. Chan, what a lovely name. And your family name? Ino asked, glancing at the ground and fidgeting with her fingers. You don't like your family name? The man asked, perplexed by Ino's answer, as she slowly shook her head. The man tried to comfort the young Ino by saying, there's no reason to be ashamed of your family. Family is always important, no matter what. Ino nodded gently and turned her head away from the kind man. As she twiddled her fingers once more, Ino said nervously, And what if your father hated you for being different? The gentle man put a sympathetic hand on Ino's soft shoulder, and Ino looked at him and smiled again. We are more alike than I had anticipated, the man said, wiping a tear from Ino's sensitive cheek. Ino-chan, my father was just like yours. He always judged me for being different, and for not being the same as all the other children my age. The man took his hand off Ino's shoulder and stood up, saying, I know I said family is important, and that is true, but sometimes, you have to create your own family. Ino squinted at the man's words, perplexed. I see you don't quite understand. No matter. With time, you will understand what I mean by choosing your own family. Go back to your father, and whenever you need someone to talk to, come back here. The man started to leave the serene area. Wait, you never told me your name, Ino exclaimed, leaping to her feet with haste. Orochimaru. My name is Orochimaru. You mustn't tell anyone in Konoha of our meeting or our talk. Can you promise me that? The tall man said abruptly, turning to face Ino. The young and impressionable woman nodded her head and smiled softly. Thank you, Ino. Orochimaru whispered before running off into the distance. As she stood directly across from Might Guy's and his Genin team's room, Ino muttered to herself, room 34. She tried to calm herself by taking a deep breath, then letting it out with force. In an attempt to hear what was being discussed on the other side, she pressed her left ear against the chilly wooden door. 10 screamed, they're too powerful, you shouldn't beat yourself up over it, as Might Guy started to cry fiercely. Neji let out a long sigh at his sensei's stupidity. Lee screamed as a searing pain shot through his body, but Guy's sensei is right, we should have defeated them easily. We are not training hard enough. Lee gave in to the agony and passed out on his cozy bed. With frustration in his voice, Neji asked, how can you even consider training when you've been beaten this much? Before any of us take any action to control the Naruto and Hinata situation, we need to recover from. As he raised a painful fist in the air, Guy roared, you've already given up hope, Neji? Neji and 10 sighed once more, and Lee gazed at his sensei in wonder and admiration. They may have won the war, but we will win the battle, Guy said. Yes, Guy sensei. Lee gave in to his body's agonizing pain once more. You baka, you got the saying mixed up, Neji whispered, then shook his head, and you always say the same thing after we fight. 10 laughed at her sensei's silliness, while Neji once more let out a deep, irritated sigh. 10 nodded in agreement with Neji. Lee exclaimed, that's because Guy sensei is always right, no matter the circumstances, which made 10 and Neji grit their teeth in exasperation. Neji rose painfully to his feet and threatened, Lee, if you don't stop kissing up to Guy, I will end your life. Lee swallowed after feeling a knot form in his throat. Now everyone, calm down, there's no need to do anything rash. Guy looked at Neji the entire time he spoke, recognizing this scene instantly and deciding it would be best to step in before anything happened. Neji sat down on his bed after noticing his sensei's intense gaze. 10 silently and slowly raised her head. Now we've all had a stressful past few days, but that's not reason to kill each other. Now, we must wait for word from the Hokage to know if we must proceed with our mission or not. Neji turned his head away from his teammates and grunted, it'd be suicide if he makes us continue our mission. 10 said, tell me about it, adding, if the Hokage wants to kill Naruto and take Hinata, then he should think about doing it himself. Naruto and Hinata are just too formidable for anyone else to handle right now. Guy opened his hand to respond, but 10 signaled for him to remain silent, saying, not even you were able to beat them, and it was 2-on-1. Had it only been 1-on-1, we would all be dead. 10 concluded solemnly, crossing her left leg slowly over her right. Neji was the first to break the silence as the four sat in silence for a while, each thinking about their own thoughts. We need to inform the Hokage of Hinata and Naruto's current strength. He needs to know this situation cannot be contained so simply. Lee whispered loud enough for his team to hear, there must be something the four of us can do to stop them. It sounds like they're willing to do just about anything to stop Naruto and Hinata. If I proceed correctly, I can utilize that to my advantage, Ino thought to herself as she placed her hand on the door handle and slowly turned it clockwise to allow the door to swing open. She took a few silent breaths and removed her ear from the door. Guy, Lee, Neji, and 10 gazed expectantly at the door as it opened. The four felt a great sense of relief and security when Ino showed up at the door. Team Guy, Ino began as she entered the room and firmly shut the door behind her. The Hokage has sent me here to give you an update on your current mission. Guy exclaimed, see, you should never lose hope, and laughed triumphantly as he did so. 10 10. Lee and Neji grinned at their sensei's constant optimism. When Ino turned to face her audience, she drew a somber expression on her face and said, "The Hokage is less than pleased that you were unable to follow simple instructions, Guy." Ino's tone changed dramatically, taking on a more sinister quality that made the four tremble with dread. "You were informed that, in the event that you crossed paths with Naruto and Hinata, that you were to keep your distance and avoid any form of confrontation. You knew they were too powerful for any of you to handle." Guy hung his head in shame, blaming himself for the suffering his genin had endured. In any case, Ino rapidly formed a large number of hand seals in anticipation of a deadly attack. In response to Ino's orders, the three genins leapt to their feet and assumed defensive positions in an effort to foil Ino's scheme. Lee's voice was dripping with venom and murderous intent as he threatened, "If you lay a hand on our sensei, I will kill you myself." Neji shifted into a more balanced position and charged at Ino, raising his right palm to attack. He thrust his palm quickly at one of Ino's chakra points, but Ino easily sidestepped the blow. Neji tried to palm strike Ino once more, but it didn't work. Ino dodged and blocked all of Neji's pointless blows, which only made Neji more irate and frustrated. To improve his chances of a successful attack, Neji extended his fingers and raised his palm once more towards Ino's chakra point in her arms. After evading the assault once more, Ino used her fingers to pinch Neji's left palm and turned his wrist until she heard a satisfying crunch of bone. Neji grimaced in agony, but he continued to attack successfully with his other hand. Dropping his left shoulder, he turned his right hand and let it go in the direction of Ino. Ino read the attack almost immediately, let go of Neji's palm to dodge it, and then, with lightning speed, punched Neji in the chest. Neji tried to attack Ino one last time, but Ino was too quick for Neji to take any action. Thick blood spurted from Neji's mouth as she quickly jabbed him multiple times in the chest. Neji was forced off the ground by Ino's devastating kick to the center of his body. "I'm impressed how you lasted as long as you did, given how weak your body is right now," Ino said sarcastically as a big, menacing smile gradually took over her face as Neji flew through the air for a few seconds before landing at his teammate's feet. "Neji!" Lee cried, looking at Neji with pity. "You'll pay for that, Ino." Ino grinned as she turned to face the vanquished Neji and gradually glazed her eyes on the remaining genins. "Are you alright, Neji?" Lee whispered to his battered comrade as he helped the defenseless Neji stand up, renouncing his current stance. "Yeah, I think so." Neji spluttered, letting several drops of blood fall from his open mouth. "I think my ribs are broken." Neji grimaced at the unbearable pain and gripped his brittle ribs with his remaining hand. "But I think I'll be fine." Lee tried to give Neji hope again by saying, "You can still fight, Neji. You've been in worse condition." Neji stood up and struggled to keep his balance with all of his remaining strength. Neji hacked and coughed, letting more blood drip from his body. This is different." Neji whispered in a painful tone, as more thick, crimson liquid poured out of his mouth. "She's powerful. Probably the most powerful foe we've had to face. Her chakra is completely different than it was before, it's more sinister, as if," Neji said. Ino flicked her hair as though Neji's words were a compliment, and Neji glanced up at her. 10. 10 put a reassuring hand on Neji's shoulder and asked, "As if what?" Neji muttered, "As if that chakra doesn't belong to her," while he turned on his Byakugan. "As if it was a ninja's that was more powerful than any other." Neji's words left Lee and 10 perplexed, and they both shook their heads in agreement. His vision was filled with thick, red chakra that was more potent than anything Neji had ever seen. Lee led Neji to the bed and sat him down, whispering, "Neji, you must be mistaken." With his loud voice immediately filling his student's ears, Guy said, "Lee, 10. Neji is not mistaken on some aspects. Ino is definitely the most powerful foe you have fought thus far, but I believe in your strengths." Ino prepared for another assault, but interrupted coldly, "Well, this is all nice and touching," adding, "but the Hokage wishes I deal with this sooner than later." "So who's next then?" Ino asked. 10. Hi. We can't take her on by ourselves. "We know that already," Lee said, looking for a moment at the vanquished and dejected Neji. "We'll stand a much greater chance if we attack together." 10 swiftly replied, "I was going to say the same thing." She then hurled a kunai at Ino with force. With a bored sigh, Ino swiftly caught the kunai in midair and said, "She's fast." Lee screamed as he raced at full speed toward Ino, "We'll just have to be faster." Lifting his fist, Lee slammed it into Ino's temple. With a menacing smile, Ino ducked beneath Lee's strong fist. Using kunai, ninja stars, daggers, and other weapons, 10 launched a flurry of ranged attacks, but Ino was able to easily intercept and avoid them. Lee used this as an opportunity to crouch behind Ino and launch a lethal barrage of attacks, but it seemed as though Ino could read each one before it was launched. To Lee's astonishment and incredulity, Ino ducked under each of Lee's fists and lightning fast kicks before launching her own assault. She gathered chakra in her hand and struck Lee, who was unprepared, in the stomach. At supersonic speed, her fist found its way to Lee's stomach. You should have learned by now that it's futile to resist. You cannot defeat me. 10 threw a few more kunai at Ino, who caught each one with her free hand and threw them back at 10 with tremendous force. 10 was forced to the ground in agonizing pain after the 4 kunai pierced the soft flesh of her arms and legs. Ino remarked sourly, "Those were getting annoying." Neji collapsed to the ground and started to console 10 as best he could. She was alerted by Ino to Lee, who had recovered from the blow. Lee's green chakra started to glow. His glossy hair stood up as though it had its own life, and his skin turned a fiery red. "So you've opened some gates, then? You still think you have a chance?" Lee cried out, "As long as I protect those who I hold dear, I will always stand a chance," as the green chakra that was devouring his body started to burn more intensely and brighter. "I've heard that line more times than anything in my lifetime." Ino laughed, "It won't change a thing now that you've opened the gates." Lee rushed to Ino, suddenly standing right in front of her. "So you've gotten a bit faster." Lee took a few steps back to give himself enough room to launch a barrage of attacks. He moved into his taijutsu stance and signaled for Ino to throw herself at him. Ino moved to her taijutsu position and smiled generously. The 3 people who were left watched in anticipation as the large room fell silent. The first to try an attack was Lee. Shortly after, he disappeared from Ino's view and reappeared behind her. Reaching for Ino's back, he raised his knee high. Ino countered Lee's knee with her elbow before turning back to the glowing thing. Lee started to attack Ino's midsection with strong blows, but Ino was able to block and avoid every one of Lee's blows. Ino found it harder and harder to keep up with Lee's attacks as his hand speed increased. Lee crushed Ino's face with his right hand after driving his left hand toward Ino's stomach. Ino was unable to block Lee's left hand because he only saw his right hand at the last second. Lee and the others were satisfied when a gory thud filled the room. As Ino flew across the room, he skidded against the chilly floor and struck the opposite wall. There were multiple bone snaps and cracks as Ino struck the wallhead, first. After a few seconds, Ino was still on the ground, motionless, nearly unconscious. Lee turned away from Ino's body and let his guard down. He grinned triumphantly as he glanced at his teammates. Lee was ecstatic by his team's applause and cheers. In an instant, the green chakra disappeared as Lee shut the gates he had opened. Both the color and the shape of his skin and hair returned to normal. Lee took a few deep breaths to replenish the oxygen he had depleted during the battle. Suddenly, a little moan escaped from Ino's body. Lee turned around in a hurry, shocked by what he saw. Ino was standing in front of him, her head distorted and misplaced. With both hands, Ino gently grasped her head and snapped her neck back into place. 10 was disgusted by the sickening crack of bones and refrained from throwing up her dinner. Looking over the rest of her body, Ino saw that the crash had also caused some of her fingers to become dislocated. She took her time, carefully popping each finger back into its socket. After twisting her ankle back to its original position, she readjusted her head once more and said, "You shouldn't treat a lady like that, Lee, they might take offense." Ino grinned and coughed softly, adding, "Luckily, I'm not one of those girls." Ino suddenly sprang forward to grab Lee's delicate neck and squeezed it so hard that it crushed his windpipe. She repeatedly struck Lee in the chest, causing a stream of blood to emerge from Lee's mouth with each blow. With a menacing giggle, Ino threw Lee in the direction of the battered and beaten Genins. As he painfully stood up, his back hunched and his arms drooping, Neji moaned weakly, "Even if I have any strength left in me, I will fight you." "That's admirable of you," Ino said, laughing at the Genin's bravery. "But I suggest you stay out of my way now." The room shook with increasing vigor as each second went by, and eventually the Genins collapsed to the ground. Their bodies were too weak from the beatings to withstand the force. "You think you're going to stop me being as weak as you are now?" Ino asked, continuing to form hand seals and muttering several words under her breath. She saw a burst of green light fill the room before she could finish planning her attack, and a few milliseconds later, she felt a strong fist strike her left cheek. With her back firmly against the door, Ino jumped backwards and said, "Looks like you've opened a few of the gates yourself." 5 to be exact. Guy said in a composed tone, as though he had encountered this circumstance innumerable times. Ino chuckled to herself and said, "Now I can finally end this thing. The Hokage wanted me back more than an hour ago. Lucky for you, you'll be dead, so you won't have to witness his fury and wrath." As he relaxed into his famous taijutsu stance, Guy said, "You know as well as I do that you're a formidable foe, but his strength and skill were nothing compared to mine. That kind of naivety will be your downfall, Guy. I understand now why you attacked Naruto and Hinata. You wanted to prove your dominance. I have no need to discuss such matters with you now. As you wish." Ino continued to form hand seals, chuckling slightly at Guy's tone. "Once this jutsu is completed, you'll wish you had listened to orders." With his hands balled into fists, Guy hurried over to Ino and challenged, "That's only if you can complete it." The Hokage told Shino, "It always amazes me how your bugs are able to finish a job almost instantly." While his bugs were consuming the last bits of skull and blood, Shino looked up at the Hokage and said, "When Ino arrives with the Genins, I want you to kill Lee." Shino said nothing in order to keep his focus. "Why would you want me to do that? He's a burden. He'll do everything in his power to avenge the death of his sensei." Shino raised an eyebrow in perplexity and asked, "Why can't Ino kill him?" "She can, but I want to see if you can do something other than clean up after everybody. Think of it as a way of proving yourself for our cause." After a few moments of contemplation, Shino lowered his head and sighed quietly, saying, "Hi, Hokage. Sama, I'll get it done as soon as he walks through the door." Hinata was standing right outside the door that emitted the chakra she had sensed moments before. She put her fragile hand on the door handle and pressed it down to open the door. Hinata's spine tingled as the heavy door squeaked open and the rusty hinges played a ghoulish tune. As soon as Hinata entered the open passage, she saw a huge hole in the stone wall right in front of her. Where did this hole come from? Hinata immediately remembered experiencing a massive shockwave not too long ago and determined that this was the cause. How is it possible for something to cause such a massive explosion? Where had that strong voice disappeared to? She searched the area in the hopes of discovering some answers to her queries. Hinata quickly activated her Byakugan since she couldn't see anything in the room with her eyes alone. Though she was unable to identify the person or people in charge of this chakra, Hinata's vision was immediately filled with visions of a thick chakra that was so powerful that it made her shudder in both fear and admiration. She took a step toward the gap in the wall and peered off into space. "It's as if it just vanished the moment I opened the door," Hinata thought to herself as she turned her back to the huge hole in the wall, unable to see any more of the potent chakra. Hinata looked around the cramped space. She saw many scratches carved deep into the room's four walls, as though some wild animal had tried to scratch its way out. She noticed how deeply the scratches had managed to pierce the concrete when she ran her silky fingertips over one of the marks. The scratch marks were made not long ago, Hinata quickly concluded. Something of immense strength and capability was here, Hinata thought as she noticed multiple burn marks on the walls. Hinata's delicate shoulder was unexpectedly embraced by a warm, gentle hand. Hinata let out a gasp, her abrupt sound disrupting the peaceful ambiance of the space. She turned quickly to confront whatever or whoever had touched her. Hinata recognized the voice immediately and felt her cheeks start to burn with a deep crimson blush as the golden figure of supremacy and elegance stood in front of her. "I'm sorry I worried you, I just had to do this on my own," Hinata said. Hinata stammered, unable to find the right words to complete her sentence, Naruto-kun. When Hinata suddenly became shy, Naruto grinned and put his golden hand back on her shoulder. For a few seconds, Hinata froze in recognition of Naruto's tender touch. "I have so much to tell you," Naruto whispered softly, keeping his eyes on Hinata the entire time. Both sides couldn't take their eyes off each other. Hinata's heart started to race as the strong sensation of lust and desire gradually grew inside of her. Naruto made the hasty suggestion, "We should head back to the hideout before Itachi comes looking for us." Before taking his hand off Hinata's sensitive shoulder, the loss of warmth in her shoulder made Hinata shudder, but she soon gathered herself and nodded in agreement with Naruto's suggestion. Grinning, Naruto quickly turned around and started to move. "I'm surprised you managed to find this place." After a few moments of silence, Naruto said, "I don't even think Itachi could locate this place in the amount of time you did." Hinata suddenly woke up from her reverie and followed him closely. In Naruto's voice, Hinata sensed a sliver of pride that made her blush uncontrollably. "Thank you, Naruto-kun, but I had a bit of help," Hinata said, her voice barely audible above a whisper, as she started to twitch her index fingers around one another. "Kisame told you about this." Naruto surveyed the surroundings to find the appropriate words to describe the building. "Temple, didn't he?" he asked. laughing to himself as he continued to walk. That Kisame, always going back on his word, I'm glad he did though. Naruto whispered the last part of his sentence, but Hinata could clearly hear every word. With a self-satisfied grin, Hinata put her hand on her chest and felt her heartbeat, which was accelerating. What is this place? Hinata tried to shift the conversation's focus to prevent herself from fainting from an increase in blood flow to her head. What kind of significance does this place hold? The two asked as they proceeded down the long, dim hallway. As Naruto gradually started to revert to his initial state, the golden glow of chakra started to fade from his body. Kisame didn't tell you, Naruto asked, turning his head to let Hinata into his field of vision. When Naruto's eyes met hers, Hinata shook her head and said, "Oh." Naruto twisted his head back to its starting position and said, "I would have thought he'd at least inform you of this." Hinata muttered something incoherently in response, preventing Naruto from hearing what Hinata had to say. After giving his neck a light scratch, Naruto went on, "Well, this place is sort of like a sanctuary for the tailed beasts." Naruto turned his head again and saw a blank look on Hinata's face. "You've heard of the tailed beasts before, haven't you?" he asked. Hinata resumed her nervous finger twiddling and said softly, "Anyo, I have, but only of the 9 tails." Hinata's reply, "The 9 tails is the most powerful of the tailed beasts. And I've only recently learned that his name is Kurama," made Kurama laugh deep inside Naruto's head. Kurama grunted from deep inside Naruto's head, "Just because I told you my name doesn't mean you have to tell everyone you meet." Naruto laughed in his head at Kurama's unexpected uneasiness. Hinata chuckled at the newfound knowledge, saying, "Kurama, it sounds beautiful. Apparently he doesn't share your thoughts." Naruto grinned to himself, "Anyway, there are 9 tailed beasts, and Kurama has told me about all of them, but we'll save their names for another time." A tailed beast is basically an entity of significant power, and each tailed beast is sealed within an individual, and these individuals are called a Jinchuriki, but it wasn't always like this. Naruto paused to compose himself, then sighed deeply and reprimanded his partner in his mind. Kurama laughed in his own head, inside Naruto's head. "So, this place has something to do with the tailed beasts?" Hinata nearly collided with Naruto as he stopped moving. After placing his hand lightly on the chilly stone walls of the hall and rubbing his fingertips against them, Naruto said, "This place was once their home, years ago." Itachi and Kisame sat in silence in the spacious living room, both of them uneasy with the general quiet that surrounded them. Uncertain of whether to end the uncomfortable silence that had descended upon them, Kisame and Itachi both reflected on their thoughts over the previous few hours. In order to avoid breaking the silence, Kisame stretched inaudibly. Itachi tried to get comfortable again on the couch by crossing his legs over each other. The two were painfully reminded of the passing time by the soft ticks of an old wooden clock as more minutes went by in silence. Kisame could almost taste the intensity of Itachi's anger in the warm air, and he could tell that he was angry with him. A pulse throbbed in the deepest recesses of Kisame's abdomen. The sense of regret and guilt was echoed by the pounding. Knowing that he would have to initiate the conversation between Itachi and himself, he sighed deeply and clenched his stomach gently. Kisame shifted his gaze to Itachi and shook his head. Itachi maintained a straight head and gazed straight ahead. Kisame's raspy voice broke the silence as he said, "I'm sure they're fine." Itachi closed his eyes and hummed a soft, unintelligible reply. Kisame nervously moved his tongue around in his mouth multiple times while biting his bottom lip. There were several more agonizing minutes during which neither side spoke, only the soft sounds of their breaths. Itachi closed his eyes tightly and started to recollect a number of memories before his current predicament. "Look, you know as well as I do that Naruto would have done this even if I hadn't told him anything." Kisame responded quickly, without stopping to catch his breath. "Hinata knows exactly where he is, and they're probably together right now, so stop worrying and stop scolding me in your mind. You know I hate that." Kisame made the decision to try to get Itachi to talk again. Before slowly opening his eyes to the dazzling light of the room, Itachi said, "I appreciate your reassurances. But your efforts are in vain. You were the one who put Hinata and Naruto in danger, and for that, I won't be forgiving you anytime soon." In response to Itachi's scathing remarks, Kisame scoffed to himself in silence. "I will, however, sit here and wait for them to turn up." "You know they won't turn up in the next 5 minutes." Kisame moaned sharply at Itachi's intransigence. "It takes time to complete the process. You can't just rush it. You have to be patient, Itachi." "They'll be here," he said, carefully placing both sets of his knuckles on his lap and letting them rest there. With a characteristic red glow emanating from his left eye, Itachi issued a serious warning. "For your sake, they better be." Kisame asked, his eyes entirely focused on Itachi, "Was that a threat?" No, it wasn't. Itachi said simply in a velvety voice, closing his eyes to make the menacing glow in his eye go away. Once more, the room was filled with silence, which made the two feel uneasy. Itachi's hope rushed through his mind as he opened his eyes and focused on the front door. Too ashamed to look at Itachi any longer, Kisame kept his gaze fixed on the ground. For a few seconds, Kisame and Itachi were captivated by the soft wind that rushed through the open windows. The wooden clock's ticks rang in the pair's ears once more. Look, Itachi, sitting here sulking isn't going to bring them back any faster. Just relax. Itachi didn't respond, so Kisame sighed in frustration. Fucking hell, Itachi, Kisame muttered to himself. Forgive me for worrying, Kisame, but as I recall. As Kisame said sarcastically, yeah, I know, I was the one who told Naruto that controlling the Kyuubi was a terrific idea, and then I also told Hinata that going after Naruto was a wonderful idea as well. You don't have to remind me. With full eye contact, Itachi coughed to clear the tingling sensation in the back of his throat before saying, and now you're telling me you haven't the slightest idea where they are. That's because I don't. All I know is that Naruto probably went somewhere quiet and away from everything to perform the ritual. Besides, they don't need anyone running after them every time they're a bit late. 2 hours is not just a bit late, Kisame. Kisame got up from his couch and asked, why do you care if they're late or not anyway? Itachi stayed calm on the sofa and would not get up, because they are under our care now, and we must do everything in our power to help them in their mission, he said, turning to face Kisame. Kisame screamed, I wasn't the one who wanted to help them, and kicked a chair across the room with force. Kisame tried to rekindle Itachi's optimism once more, taking a few deep breaths to calm himself before settling back into his spot on the couch and saying, look, they'll be back. You know it as well as I do that they'll be back. To Kisame's dismay, Itachi sighed, they're taking too long. He then got up from his chair and firmly whispered, I'm going to go look for them. As Kisame said, you don't even know where they could be. No, you're not. No, I don't. After a brief pause, Itachi sighed and said, but I'll find them. He then rapidly tapped his left foot on the wooden floor. With every second that went by, Kisame's voice grew progressively more cool as he said, even if you do leave, there'd be no point. They'll be back before you get to where they might be. Itachi started to pace the living room, avoiding and waving at various pieces of furniture. Kisame, we have to find them. We have to go out and look for them, regardless of the dangers outside, Itachi said, glancing at the door every other second as his pacing increased in intensity. After Kisame finished speaking, he spit metaphorical blades from Itachi's eyes and asked, what happened to you going out there? Why are you dragging me into this all of a sudden? Kisame was annoyed by Itachi's continued worried pacing around the large living room, saying, they both should have been back hours ago. They're taking too long, something must have happened to them. Itachi strode through the room toward the door, his footsteps making a soft tapping sound each time his lenient feet touched the wooden floor. Kisame's eyes remained fixed on Itachi as he quickly sat up. When he got to the door, Itachi hurriedly grabbed a jacket and hat from the clothing stand next to it and said, I'm going to go look for them. They're more than likely in danger. Itachi threw the door open and was about to step outside when he was restrained by a tight hold on his shoulder. Whoa, Itachi. Itachi fought to break free from Kisame's hold, saying, you know going out there is a mistake. When Itachi violently tore his shoulder from Kisame, he whispered, not if I'm looking for the only two individuals who can make a change to this world. Kisame gently raised his eyebrows. You know the Akatsuki will be looking for us, and plus you don't even know where they'll be. If you run into the Akatsuki, you'll have no choice but tea. Before Kisame could explain, Itachi calmly interrupted, I know. Kisame scoffed softly as he looked at Itachi's feet, saying, you're not even wearing anything on your feet. Itachi also stared at his smooth, graceful feet for a few seconds before letting himself smile a little. Looks like you're not bluffing. Itachi shivered softly as a blast of cold air rushed past his bare feet. I need to look for them, Kisame. But we have to be careful of the Akatsuki. They're more than likely looking for us, and they will start with our hideouts. Kisame sighed to himself and considered his options. He couldn't tell Itachi where to look for Naruto and Hinata because he had promised both of them that he wouldn't before this moment. Then we'll go and look for them. Kisame caught a glimpse of Itachi's overwhelmed expression out of the corner of his eye. Itachi nodded his head gently and hastily put on a spare pair of shoes that are just across from the wooden front door. After a few moments of self-examination, Kisame concluded he was sufficiently clothed to leave the hiding place. The bright sunshine of the warm morning sky greeted Itachi as soon as he stepped out the door. Let's get moving. We only have a few hours of sunlight left before it gets dark. Kisame closed the door firmly behind him, locking it firmly with a corroded key. Itachi was closely followed by Kisame, who was also welcomed by the son's loving embrace. Soon after, there was the comforting sound of the locks clicking into position. Unaware of the dangers that awaited them, Kisame gave the door handle one final tug to make sure it was locked before leaving with Itachi into the dark and dangerous forest. The new information caused Hinata's eyes to widen with surprise. This place was their home? She asked, looking around the hallway and noticing a number above each of the 3 metal doors nearby. There are numbers above the doors. Hinata quickly told Naruto, pointing to the door next to them that was marked 5. Naruto opened the door beside them and quickly decoded, one for each of the tailed beasts. The numeral 5 appeared to have been carved into the wall above the metal door using a sharp claw, as Naruto quickly deduced. The bone. Chilling serenade from the door's rusted hinges caused Naruto and Hinata to grind their teeth in response to the harsh noise. The first person to enter the dimly lit room was Naruto. He turned on his Rinnegan to light up the space. At first look, the room appeared to be large enough to hold 3 tailed beasts at once, about the same size as the room Naruto had been in when sealing Kurama. As Naruto saw Hinata enter the room, he quickly pointed out that there are pictures of all the tailed beasts. A large bed was located in the right corner of the opposite side of the room, and numerous tarnished and corroded photographs were plastered across the room's walls. What do these pictures mean, Naruto? Hinata asked herself as she turned on her Byakugan and spent several minutes staring at the numerous pictures, focusing on each of the 12 that were arranged along the 4 walls. Naruto also looked at all 12 of the pictures. It looks like the tailed beasts in their youth. Naruto muttered, his eyes moving along the images, but I don't know what kind of significance they hold. Each picture featured the 9 tailed beasts, some of which featured multiple tailed beasts in a single image. You've discovered something that I didn't believe you were prepared for, Kurama moaned from Naruto's innermost thoughts. I always knew that Hyuga girl would cause some kind of trouble, Kurama said with a small laugh. What's all this? As he continued to look at the numerous photos, Naruto asked his beastly counterpart, when were these all taken? Years ago, Naruto. Boy, in a time when the Sage of the 6 Paths had each of the tailed beasts sealed within him, Kurama said, letting out a sigh from inside Naruto's head. But that is a story for another time, Kurama said, sensing the bewilderment radiating from Naruto. However, how are there images if every tailed beast was imprisoned inside this Sage of the 6 Paths? Naruto asked Kurama in his mind. The sage was a strong individual. You shouldn't obsess over the fact that he occasionally let us leave his body and enter the real world. You only need to be aware of the danger facing the tailed beasts. In danger? Kurama, what are you talking about? Naruto interrupted abruptly. Kurama laughed at Naruto's constant desire to fix something, saying, well, if you stopped interrupting me, maybe I'll tell you. Naruto pouted in response to Kurama reprimanding him, saying, the 5 tails took down these photos years ago after we all had our own vessels, in case they return. That implies that someone other than the tailed beasts had left them here with the knowledge that someone would find them. The only question is how and by whom they were able to obtain them in the first place. Like you and I, aren't all the tailed beasts mentally connected? You ought to know something, Naruto said hastily. Naruto. Boy, it's not that easy, Kurama sighed again. My mental connection to every one of the tailed beasts has been severed. What? How could that have occurred? What? Naruto asked. I'm not sure. However, someone is making great efforts to acquire the tailed beasts because they want them. There were a few moments of silence before Naruto yelled, fuck. Deeper in his thoughts, Naruto discovered that he was standing across from Kurama in a spacious, exquisitely furnished room with brand new, clean wallpaper on all 4 walls but no furniture. You've changed room, he thought to Kurama in jest, I prefer it. However, it feels somewhat familiar. Baka, you don't have to think to me when we're in here, and this room was the room I owned when I was in my youth. So, what exactly do you mean by, the tailed beasts are in danger? Naruto asked, continuing his pacing analysis of the spacious room. You mean when the Sage of the 6th Paths had you sealed within him? Kurama nodded slowly. It's nice. I guess that's why it looked so familiar. It was in one of the photos in the 5 tails room. It's exactly what it sounds like. Someone wants the tailed beasts for something, and for what I'm not sure, Kurama said, slowly shaking his head after examining Naruto. Naruto stopped suddenly and looked at Kurama. Maybe it's the Akatsuki? He asked. After hearing Naruto's suggestion, Kurama guffawed for a few minutes. Impatiently, Naruto tapped his foot on the ground, anticipating Kurama's response. No, the Akatsuki are not behind this. How can they not be? It makes sense. Kurama immediately saw Naruto's expression change to one of confusion, saying, however much sense it makes is irrelevant. The Akatsuki cannot be behind this, because there is no way they could pull it off. What I mean by that is the Akatsuki is weak. There is no way they could manage to sever the link between all 9-tailed beasts. No, someone else is behind this, Kurama said. Inhaling deeply, Naruto exhaled slowly after his lungs had filled up. Okay then, if it's not the Akatsuki, who could it be? Naruto asked quickly, as if he had figured out the secret, rubbing his hairless chin with his thumb and index finger. How does one sever the link between a tailed beast? He asked. Kurama's eyes widened in terror as he said, the only way the link between a tailed beast can be severed is if a tailed beast breaks them, but even then it takes time. Naruto collapsed to the ground while seated, saying, so a tailed beast is behind this. That would explain a lot. Yes, but even then, like I said, it takes time. This happened over the course of a few days. It would usually take several years for the links to be properly dissolved. So what you mean is more than one tailed beast is behind this? Naruto asked after giving it some thought. That's precisely what I mean. But the tailed beasts would never betray one another willingly. Someone, a powerful ninja, must have deluded them into thinking otherwise. Kurama sank to the ground, shaking his head in shock that his worst fear had come true. Naruto raised an eyebrow but said nothing. If someone was able to remove 2, or even more, tailed beasts from their original vessels and then take full control of them, then our situation is dire. He lay on his soft belly and put his hands under his chin. We're facing something far worse than I had first anticipated, Naruto. The two sat in silence for almost 20 minutes. The room was filled with the gloom and despair of the situation, which made the silence uncomfortable. So what do we do? Naruto asked softly, his voice hardly audible above a whisper, as both Kurama and Naruto considered their options. We need facts. We must seek out the wisest of the tailed beasts, the one-tail. Shukaku. The one-tail, Naruto immediately recalled that specific tailed beast. That's Gaara's tailed beast, right? Kurama nodded. You want me to go to the hidden village of sand? But I'm a wanted criminal. I'll never make it past the gate. While it's true you're a wanted man, you are also a ninja. The inhabitants of the village of sand don't even need to know you were there. Kurama suggested, as he took a seat. Now what Shukaku lacks in charisma he makes up for in knowledge. He should have some understanding of what is happening. He might even know which of the tailed beasts have been taken. I don't like this. Naruto started by saying, it feels like this situation is only the beginning. Maybe because it only is the beginning of something much larger, something we may have to face ourselves. Since his body was still in the real world, Naruto thought quickly, what about Hinata? I don't think she should come with me to the sand village. After a few moments of reflection, Kurama said, I think Hinata would be better off if she knew nothing of what we just spoke about. It will be easier for us to complete our objective without having more people with us. We need to get to the hidden village of sand as soon as possible. Who knows how much damage the ninja has already created, said Naruto, nodding in agreement. As he started to get ready to leave his head and return to reality, Naruto got up and dismissed himself, saying, well then, I guess I should head off as soon as I get back to the hideout. Kurama felt a tear escape from his eye and wiped the dripping tear from his furry cheek. Naruto said, nodding, I wanted to express my gratitude for helping me free my brothers. You have a kind heart, as you always have your whole life. Naruto couldn't resist grinning broadly and rushed toward Kurama. Kurama was surprised when he threw his arms across the beast's woolly chest and gave him a firm embrace. In return, Kurama put his long arms around Naruto's frail little body and said, You're crushing me. Naruto stumbled to speak, so Kurama had to let go of the boy. After the lethal hold was released, Naruto retreated from Kurama and inhaled deeply, saying, ow. Sorry about that, Naruto. Boy, you're much smaller than I had expected, Kurama said, laughing at Naruto. After returning to his body, Naruto glanced around quickly. Isn't it, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked quietly as Naruto started to regain consciousness. Isn't what? Naruto snapped back, his expression filled with astonishment. After a few seconds of staring at the picture, Hinata sighed and gestured to one of the pictures that were hanging on the wall by a thread. That picture, it's beautiful, isn't it? Hinata said, I think it's a photo of Kurama. Naruto gazed at the image that particularly caught Hinata's attention. This image showed Kurama as a young child, with a broad smile covering the fox's face. For several minutes, Naruto gazed at the image, enthralled with its contents. All of the tailed beasts were seated around a little table in the photo. There was a big birthday cake on the table with 3 candles in the middle of it. Naruto's gaze was diverted to Kurama in the image. In the photo, Naruto saw a single tear droplet fall from Kurama's eye. Naruto. Boy, that's enough looking at pictures of my past, Kurama said, his voice breaking more and more as he spoke. Kurama's booming voice suddenly echoed from inside Naruto's head. Naruto turned to Hinata after deciding it was time to leave the former tailed beast's home. He touched Hinata's arm, causing her to snap out of her reverie. We should go. Kurama and I have seen enough. Hinata nodded her head subtly in response to Naruto's suggestion. Hinata cautiously followed Naruto as he entered the room. The memories of Kurama's early life were essentially locked inside room number 5 when Naruto shut the door firmly behind them after Hinata had left. As soon as Hinata noticed that Naruto's expression had changed, she said, Naruto-kun. Naruto snapped out of his reverie and looked at Hinata, asking, what's wrong? The young Hyuga gave Naruto a violent blush when he placed his right hand on Hinata's left hand and gently grasped her delicate hand. Nothing, I'm fine. It's just seeing Kurama like that in the photographs surprised me is all. Naruto allowed himself a smile, fully aware that his justification wasn't entirely false. After taking a moment to gather herself after Naruto's gentle touch, Hinata shakily placed her free hand on top of Naruto's right hand and said, I'm glad nothing's wrong. Unable to find the right words to express her agitated state, Hinata uttered the words. Realizing that this might be their last time together, Naruto hurriedly gathered Hinata in a cozy and loving embrace. The unexpected move caused Hinata to yell. Her cheeks started to burn more intensely and brighter. Hinata reprimanded herself in her mind. She had assumed that by now she had total control over her blushing. Hinata eventually buried her tiny nose in Naruto's neck after Naruto rested his chin on top of her small head. Hinata took advantage of the chance to approach Naruto because her bright blush would not go away. She stepped closer to Naruto after wearily wrapping her little arms around his firm body. With a sigh of relief, Naruto tightened his hold on Hinata's body. Then, as if to move his lips to her ear, Naruto moved his chin from Hinata's head and placed it on her shoulder. Hinata, I just want you to know that I will always protect you. This was the best thing he could think of, and he silently cursed himself for his lack of sincerity. In response to Naruto's statement, Hinata nodded. With their eyes meeting, the two slowly parted ways. With a swift motion, Naruto brushed a lock of hair out of Hinata's eye, making her heart skip a beat. We should probably get moving. There's no doubt that Itachi and Kisame are wondering where we are. After Hinata nodded and her red flush subsided a bit, they headed down the dim and uneven corridor. For almost 2 hours, Itachi and Kisame had been strolling through the damp and dark forest. No amount of sunlight could penetrate the forest because the large trees' dense branches were disgorged in all directions and the impenetrable leaves they held blocked the sky, effectively enclosing them in a blanket of darkness. Since the two of them had first entered the cunning forest, Itachi had been growing impatient because all he could see there were trees and wildlife. To his chagrin, no people had crossed their path. The two stopped moving and chose to sit on a fallen tree. Kisame said, they might have made their way back to the hideout. He lowered himself to sit on the fallen tree in the hopes that his words would restore Itachi's patience. Itachi, who was sitting on the tree's bark about 13 inches from Kisame, let out a painful sigh. After acknowledging Itachi's sigh, Kisame smirked slightly and said, we just have to endure, Itachi. You know this better than anyone I've ever met. Kisame's voice was full of assurance. Itachi, tired of Kisame's condescending remarks, glared at him. The uneasy silence that followed the pair's one-sided conversation was broken by the steady gush of wind. There were several moments when the only sound in the room was the calming sound of the great wind. Itachi tried to calm himself by sitting with his eyes tightly closed. With his eyes still closed, Itachi was the first to interrupt the peaceful quiet. How long have we been walking? He asked. Almost immediately, Kisame responded, I make it roughly 2 hours. With a sigh, Itachi opened his eyes quickly and said, and we haven't seen anything but trees and the wildlife that inhabit this place. He then crossed his legs in an attempt to find a more comfortable position. We just have to keep looking, if we give it Anyo. Itachi interrupted abruptly, saying, wait, as a sound that was barely audible above a whisper rushed past his ear. I heard something. Itachi, I think all this walking has made you mad. I don't hear anything. Kisame remained motionless and concentrated his hearing, but he could only hear the wind and Itachi's shallow breathing. Kisame laughed quietly and looked straight at Itachi, saying, if you're trying to fuck with my mind, don't bother. I know your games, Itachi. There, again. Itachi pointed to the area where the noise originated and said, it's coming from over there. I think someone may have found us. Itachi activated his Sharingan and stared in the direction of the noise. Once more, He heard a nearly non-existent noise and leapt to his feet, ready to confront whatever had caused it. Kisame repeatedly tutted and gave a gentle shake of his head, saying, "Itachi, stop fucking about. You know as well as I do that there's nothing over there. I always knew your hearing was terrible, but I never imagined it was this bad." Itachi prepared himself into a taijutsu position, thinking, hopefully it's the former. As Kisame slowly started unwrapping Samahata, Itachi said sarcastically, refusing to remove his hawk like vision from the source of the noise. Itachi heard another noise, but this time it was more prominent, but Kisame was still unable to hear anything. Kisame laughed at the impatience of Itachi. Kisame continued to irritate Itachi by slowing down even more. He had peeled off enough of the white crystal bandage to reveal Samahata. "Sorry old buddy, but Itachi figures he needs your specialities." Kisame stroked Samahata in an attempt to calm the slumbering sword, which snarled in rage after Kisame roused it from a deep sleep. Kisame gently responded to Samahata's violent snarl at Itachi by saying, Hey, calm down. He only wants your help. There's no need to insult him like that." The two of them laughed quietly together. Kisami's ineptitude made Itachi sigh. Samahata exhaled sharply through his nose almost immediately, and he whimpered as he did so. As Samahata started dragging Kisame in the direction of the same spot Itachi's eyes were fixed on, Kisami's expression changed to one of greater concern. "I think Samahata can smell something," Kisame said, arching his back and bringing his left ear closer to Samahata's lips. "He says he thinks he can smell two different chakras, each equally as powerful." Kisame tore the last of the bandages off Samahata's scaly skin, revealing the sword in its full form. "I think it's the Akatsuki," Kisame whispered, preparing himself for battle. They remained in total silence for several minutes, Itachi, Kisame, and Samahata feeling more and more nervous. The agonizing silence was soon broken by a flurry of branch snaps and wildlife cries. Itachi swiftly figured out the situation. He knew exactly how the Akatsuki operated. "Now all we have to do is figure out who's out there," Itachi whispered to Kisame as Kisame gulped and cleared the accumulation of saliva in his throat caused by his anxiety. "They must be watching us, planning their next move." Kisame nodded before lightly tapping Samahata's side with his outstretched hand. Samahata responded with a grunt and resumed sniffing, this time to figure out who was pursuing them. After a few seconds, Samahata complained once more, and Kisame pressed his ear to his sword's lips and whispered, "Samahata says he can smell the chakra of both Kakuzu and Hidan." His voice was barely audible over the soft wind. After hearing the names of the people pursuing them, Itachi stayed composed and gave Kisame a nod. Itachi and Kisame remained silent for several minutes, each in a taijutsu pose. "Kakuzu, Hidan," Itachi said, activating his Sharingan. "Hiding in the trees won't accomplish anything. You should know that." A characteristic cackle broke the calm forest air. In response to the laughter, Samahata snarled, "Hidan," Itachi muttered. Two figures suddenly materialized in front of Kisame and Itachi. One had piercing green eyes, and the other was brandishing a demonic-looking sword. Three huge, crimson spikes protruded from the blade, and the green-eyed figure said, "Itachi, Kisame." The tan man's eyes were the only feature of his face that was visible because he was wearing a dark blue mask and a white hood. "You do know that there is a bounty on both of your heads for your defection?" The tall man asked, rolling up the sleeves of his Akatsuki cloak to reveal stitches running the length of both his arms. 25 million yen for the head of Itachi, and 20 million for the head of Kisame. The tall man laughed and gave his partner a pat on the back. "It looks like after we kill the both of you, I can retire from my day job," he said in jest, causing his teammate to guffaw a little. Itachi and Kisame were not impressed. Kisame quickly wiped away the several drops of perspiration that trickled down his forehead with the back of his hand. The other man asked, "How can you call yourselves Akatsuki?" This white man had neither a hood nor a mask, so his sleek gray hair was visible to everyone. "How can you still wear that cloak?" the man asked, looking quickly at his orange-painted fingernails before continuing. "I should make your death long and painful. Only then will Jashin be pleased." His eyes were a gorgeous dark purple, and he wore no shirt underneath his Akatsuki cloak. "Baka. Don't tart that religious nonsense now, Hidan." Kakuzu struck Hidan lightly on the back of his skull with an open palm before turning to face his partner and saying, "I will kill you if you don't cease." His tone became more solemn. Hidan pointed to Itachi and Kisame and said, "Instead of taking your misdirected anger out on me, why don't you take it out on those two fucking betrayers in front of us?" He then laughed. Kisame said bluntly, "Kakuzu, you'll never change. You've always been in it for the money." Samahata gave his master a grunt of agreement. Killing you, Kisame, is something I've wanted to do ever since I joined Akatsuki, Kakuzu said, twisting his left arm around, making Kisame and Itachi sick. And it looks like my dream is finally going to come true, he said, chuckling slightly and focusing entirely on the shark. Like monster. In order to keep Hidan and Kakuzu from hearing, Itachi muttered, Kisame. We can't fight them right now. Kisame froze for a few seconds before turning his head slightly to face Itachi. You know as well as I do that if we fight them, we won't be able to beat them. We need a plan to deal with Kakuzu's hearts and a plan to deal with Hidan's immortality. We have neither of these. Kisame nodded slightly to let Itachi know he could be heard. So what do you propose? Kisame returned the whisper, matching Itachi's volume. Itachi, his body still in the taijutsu stance, suggested, we find somewhere else to hide, somewhere the Akatsuki does not know about. We get back to the hideout, we leave a message for Naruto and Hinata. Refocusing his gaze back to the two enemies, Kisame sighed and said, you know best. But we have no other place to hide. I may know a small town that the Akatsuki has no knowledge about. Kisame asked, and how would you have obtained such information about this small town? My father, before his demise, had many friends that owed him favors. One of those friends lives in the town. Only those with good intentions could find and get into the town. Well, we have our new location. Are you sure we can get in though? We've both done things we're not proud of. Like I said, if one has good intentions, one can get in. I'm guessing between Naruto, Hinata, you and I, we all have good intentions. As he raised his sword in readiness, Hidan yelled, what are you fucks whispering about? You better not be having second thoughts about this. Kisame relaxed into a neutral position and said, sarcastically, see, that's just the thing. Hidan and Kakuzu gave him a stern look as he said, my mother just called. She's very sick, and I have to see to it that she gets better. Kisami's unexpected statement made Itachi laugh. With his shoulders lowered, Kakuzu said impassively, you and Itachi are going to die in this very forest. Think of it as your unmarked grave. You're not going to weave your way out of this one, Kisame. For almost 20 minutes, Naruto and Hinata had been strolling through the tailed beast's ethereal lair. But Naruto thought they were nearing the end of the corridor. He started imagining how Itachi and Kisame would be disappointed in and annoyed with him and Hinata. He gave a silent laugh and followed Hinata down the corridor. A gentle object brushed past Naruto's cheek, and he turned to see where it came from. It soon became clear to him that it was Hinata's exquisite hair. After staring at Hinata's smooth hair for a few seconds, Naruto said, your hair's getting longer. This statement almost roused Hinata from her contemplative state. I haven't really had the time to get it cut. Hinata responded jokingly, drawing a little laugh from Naruto, as she gently pulled on a long strand of her hair and slowly twiddled it around her little index finger. Plus, I prefer it longer. With his interest piqued, Naruto asked, and why is that? As the two of them continued to walk, Hinata closed her eyes for a few seconds before saying, it reminds me of how my mother did her hair when I was a little girl. Naruto smiled slightly at Hinata's sentimental response. You never really knew your mother, did you, Hinata? Naruto's sudden question startled Hinata, as if a knot were to form in her throat. Naruto almost immediately remembered that Hinata barely knew her mother, a trait he could relate to, considering his own predicament with regard to his own parents. Hinata's question struck a painful chord, and Naruto saw that he was lacking in words. I'm sorry about that question. You don't have to answer it if it makes you uncomfortable. Naruto quickly responded, his words hesitant. At Naruto's abrupt change in confidence, Hinata nearly burst out laughing, saying, no, it's fine Naruto-kun. Before answering, Hinata took a deep breath and said, as a little girl, I always looked up to my mother. I have no memories of her, or even how she looked. All I know for certain is that she was a kind woman, who always helped anyone in need. Although she felt a few tears fall down her cheeks, she went on, saying, I always told myself I would be like mother. She wiped away the tears that were streaming down her cheeks and the ones that were still in her eyes. After telling Hinata his story, Naruto's mind was jumbled with visions of her basic helplessness and vulnerability. You know those people that say, I know how you feel, but they really haven't the slightest idea of how you're feeling, or even what you're going through. Naruto said softly, well, I know exactly how you feel. You already know what I'm about to tell you, but I didn't even know my father or my mother. I never met them, because they died when I was a baby. Hinata nodded gently as more tears came out of her eyes. Naruto recalled his brief encounter with his parents, but he also remembered his vow to Kurama that he had to keep Hinata in the dark. I don't even know what they look like, or who they were. Naruto told a half-truth, but he made a distinction that it was the best course of action given the situation. At Naruto's words, Hinata let out a sigh of sympathy, understanding Naruto's predicament in relation to his parents. She put a hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, "You don't have to go through this alone, Naruto-kun." Hinata had never played the part of a sympathizer before, but she did her best. Though Naruto was thankful for Hinata's words, he thought, but alone is the only way I can get through it. I know Hinata. After taking her hand off Naruto's shoulder, Hinata grinned and said, "I'm glad." Her cheeks once more turned a characteristic shade of red. In order to prevent Naruto from seeing her constant blush, she covered her face. Neither side made a sound, and a dense silence fell over the hallways. During the uncomfortable silence, Hinata and Naruto exchanged condolence glances, but eventually tore their vision from one another. "I think it suits you well." Hinata looked at Naruto with bewildered eyes. "The hair, I mean. It suits you well." Naruto repeated in agreement, causing Hinata to blush deeply crimson. Hinata was about to thank Naruto for the compliment as she caressed her hair with her sensitive fingertips when she saw the entrance coming. With her fingers out of her hair, Hinata gestured to the door at the end of the hallway and said, "Naruto, we're here." As they got closer to the door, Naruto glanced at the spot where Hinata was pointing and felt a wave of relief pass through his thoughts. "That took longer than I expected," Naruto said quickly. As one approached the uncovered door, the various sounds of nature could be heard. The delicate and graceful cries of the birds, the serene and gentle wind, the sound of the running water, and the leaves and twigs of the many trees dancing to the pleasant tune of the wind. The pair exited the former tailed beast's lair by walking through the open doors. Hinata said, shielding her eyes from the intense sunlight with her hand, "We should get back as soon as possible." The sun was still high in the sky, allowing lovely rays of light to engulf the forest. As he moved slowly through the lush grass surrounding the lair, Naruto nodded in agreement with Hinata and said, "I can imagine Itachi and Kisame won't be happy with either of us." Naruto told another half. Truth as Hinata trailed him, "When we get back, I have a few errands to run." With her curiosity at its height, Hinata questioned, "Errands? What do you mean, Naruto-kun?" Naruto gave the best explanation he could without giving away anything he wasn't supposed to. "It's just some things Kurama wanted me to do once I got back. I'll only be gone a few days at most." "A few days? What do you mean, a few days? Naruto, what's going on?" Hinata was starting to doubt Naruto's sincerity when he abruptly suggested that he would be gone for a few days. "What are you really doing?" she asked. As Hinata was about to question Naruto about the location of the errands, he interrupted her with yet another half. "Truth. Like I said, I'm running a few errands for Kurama. I'm only going to be away for so long because of where he wants me to go. And I can't tell you where I'm going. He wants this to be for my eyes and my eyes only." With an exasperated sigh, Hinata pursed her lips and said, "If you say so, Naruto-kun." "Are unmarked graves?" Kisame asked mockingly, gently scratching the back of his neck. "I think you've confused my words. I said me and Itachi have some very important business to take care of, so we can't stay and chat with you and your pet over there." Kisame gestured to Hidan and laughed to himself. Kisame started laughing at Kakuzu's threat, and his laughter gradually turned into a heartfelt guffaw. With his eyes looking directly into the hearts of both of his enemies, Kakuzu asked venomously, "Important business? Tending to your sick mother is important business?" Kisame sarcastically said, drawing a savage glare from Kakuzu, "Well, your family never loved you, so I can imagine caring for a family member rates pretty low on your list of priorities." Kisame pointed out plainly, tapping his foot steadily against the floor, "Hey, looks like he didn't like that one, Itachi." With a tone full of annoyance, Hidan said, "Stop fucking us about Kisame. We know as well as you do that your mother died years ago." With his deadly sword sheathed, Hidan slowly and deliberately cracked all of his knuckles before saying, like Kakuzu said, "This forest will be your grave." Hidan's savage words were followed by a loud cackle. Kisame heard Itachi whisper, "They're not going to let us leave." Kisame sighed and put both hands on his hips. "Look, guys," Kisame said to his two former Akatsuki teammates, "we don't want to fight you. We just want to get out of this fucking forest. We've been walking around in here for almost 2 hours now. You don't think I know that?" Kisame whispered back, "I'm beginning to think we're not going to leave this forest alive." "Oh." Kisame and Itachi's goal in the forest caught Kakuzu's attention, and he asked, "And why would the two of you be in the forest?" Itachi sarcastically whispered to Kisame, "Yeah, Kisame, why were we in this forest, other than the fact we were searching for the two ninjas we need to protect?" Itachi's dissatisfied sigh could be heard behind him as Kisame whispered back to his partner, I'm thinking. We were sick of the lack of pay the Akatsuki supplied us with, and so we are in search of the Sage of the Six Paths hidden treasure." Instead of responding to Itachi, Kisame remained motionless and hoped Hidan and Kakuzu would take the bluff. In a whisper, Itachi asked Kisame, "Is that the best you could think of?" Kisame responded in a whisper, "Just shut the fuck up and hope they take it." Streams of perspiration trickled down Kisame's brow, but he refrained from wiping them away for fear of Hidan and Kakuzu spotting his bluff. As if he were a little child, Hidan snorted loudly and said, "You, of all people, were looking for fucking treasure? Don't make us laugh. Come on Kakuzu. Jashin longs for a sacrifice, and I want to kill something already." "This treasure you speak of," Kakuzu said, "his money." Grubbing mind practically taking over, the sage of the sixth path buried this himself? Kisame and Itachi both sighed in defeat at the same time, bracing themselves for a tough battle. With a startled look on his face, Hidan remarked, "Kakuzu, even I know you're not stupid enough to fall for their lie. They only want to buy time." With his back to the enchanted Itachi and Kisame, Kakuzu said, "Now you listen to me, Hidan. The sage of the six paths hidden treasure is worth more than 15 Itachis. It's never been found. I wouldn't be surprised if it was hidden in a forest like this. Nobody would think to look for it here." Hidan opened his mouth to say something, but Kakuzu stopped him with a firm palm across his partner's mouth. "If they are bluffing, we'll kill them. If they do lead us to the treasure, we'll kill them anyway. More money for us, right Hidan?" Kakuzu said, drawing a sly smile from beneath his mask. "You greed will get you fucking killed one day, you old fool," Hidan said, yanking Kakuzu's hand away from his mouth. "I doubt it." Kakuzu's smile only grew wider as he turned to face Itachi and Kisame and said, "Tell me, Kisame. How long have you and Itachi been hunting this treasure for?" Kisame let himself take a deep breath of relief. He cocked his head slightly to smile triumphantly at Itachi. Silently, Itachi sneered at Kisame, saying, "Well, I think it's been about 3 months now." It was difficult pinpointing it to this exact location. Itachi did most of the work though. Itachi reprimanded his partner behind his back, and as he did so, he muttered death wishes to him. "We just lost our way slightly." Kisame pointed to his left. As they gazed at the spot Kisame had indicated, Kakuzu and Hidan quickly spotted a stone path through the woods and said, "We need to take that path to get back on track." Hidan muttered to his avaricious companion, "I don't like this. I know they're going to try something once we get far enough into the forest," he said. Kakuzu started to move toward the stone path, saying, "And when, and if, they do, we'll end their life without hesitation." Hidan sneered and trailed behind him. After exchanging uncertain looks, Itachi and Kisame said, "Come on, Itachi and Kisame. We need you to lead us to the treasure." Itachi said softly, "This had better work, Kisame." He then followed Hidan and Kakuzu. After a few brief moments, the four started to fade into the distance. Abruptly, a tree directly across from the path began to move. It already did work. Kisame moaned as he painfully stood up after a figure fell from the tree's lush leaves and hit the ground with a loud thud. "That was a well thought out plan, Kisame." Itachi put a hand on Kisame's shoulder to help him get off the hard ground. Itachi jumped from the tree Kisame had just fallen from moments before and landed on the floor with great elegance. "Yeah, well, I'm known to have a few moments of brilliance every now and again." The two of them laughed for a moment. "But we shouldn't celebrate yet. It won't take them long to realize that we sent shadow clones with them," Itachi said calmly, checking to make sure Hidan and Kakuzu were not there. "How they fell for that is unbeknown to me. The hidden treasure of the sage of the six paths." Kisame brushed the dirt from his clothes and said, "Why didn't you just use your Sharingan? You could have put them in an eternal illusion or something." Sighing, Itachi made eye contact with Kisame and said, "Even if it had worked, I'm only able to trap one soul at a time in Genjutsu. Anymore, and I just put my eyes under unnecessary stress." As the two of them started to return to the hiding place, Kisame said bluntly, "I think your eyes could handle a little bit of stress given the situation. It's not that simple. I would have to keep them in the Genjutsu long enough for you to kill Kakuzu and to disable Hidan. That would have taken too long, which would have a serious impact on me." Kisame laughed at Itachi's arrogance. Kisame grunted, "Yeah, if you say so, Itachi. Come on, we need to get to the hideout before those two realize we fooled them," he said, checking over his shoulder to make sure no one was following them. The two sped up, swerving and swerving past branches sticking out of the many trees in the pitch black forest. No amount of sunlight could break through the ghoulish ambiance of the woods. It was now 15 minutes later. The two kept moving in the direction of the hiding place, never slowing down. "This is taking too long," Kisame grumbled, pausing briefly to catch his breath. After a few moments of silence, Itachi said, "I remember this area." He also stopped walking and started evaluating the area. As he raised himself to a standing position, Kisame moaned, "Yeah, me too. It looks the same as the rest of this fucking forest." "We're almost out of here," Itachi said, his voice growing hopeful. "We crossed this area just minutes after we entered the forest." As he walked on, Kisame said, "Well, that's just great, but I think I'll join you in celebration after we get to the hideout." As soon as Kisame saw that Itachi was still motionless and surveying the surroundings, he said, "Hey, Itachi. You coming or what?" Itachi turned to face Kisame, nodded, and then walked over to him. Both parties were silent for a few more minutes as they considered their options. After considering how Kakuzu and Hidan responded to Kisame's bluff, Itachi concluded, "What if they know we're bluffing, and already have some sort of plan? I'm still shocked as to how Hidan and Kakuzu fell for that bluff. That shouldn't have worked." "Don't even start this now. You always think things, Itachi." Kisame sighed. "Hey Itachi, we're here." Kisame and Itachi approached the front door after he pointed to the hiding place. Kisame walked through the door after carefully opening it. Itachi trailed behind and shut the door. With a sigh, Kisame threw himself onto the cozy couch and let out a loud yawn. "So what's the plan?" Kisame asked, setting Samahata on the vacant spot next to him. "We should wait for Naruto and Hinata here, and run the danger of being apprehended by those undead jerks?" At Itachi's suggestion, Kisame sneered, "Come on, Itachi, even you can do better than that. Naruto and Hinata have no idea of our run.in with the Akatsuki." Itachi said, "They need to know where we have to go next. Is it not possible for you to simply leave them a note or something?" Kisame yawned again after asking. "No, everything will be in danger if Hidan and Kakuzu read the note, which they will." Itachi closed his eyes and thought for a while before opening them again and turning to face Kisame. "I had hoped the Akatsuki would give us more time than this. They're hunting us too fast," he said. "They're the best of the best, the Akatsuki. That's what they do," Kisame said promptly. "No, this is different in some way. It seems as though Hidan and Kakuzu were aware of our exact location." "What are you suggesting?" Kisame asked, scratching his cheek in bewilderment. Quietly, he inquired. Itachi said, "Nothing at the moment." Leaning back in his chair to unwind, he started tapping a simple tune with his index finger on the wooden arm of his chair, which annoyed Kisame. "We have to get out of this area as soon as possible," Itachi suggested quietly. Both Itachi and Kisame were startled by a series of sudden knocks on the door, which prompted them to stand up. Itachi motioned for Kisame to remain silent, and Kisame simply nodded. Itachi moved slowly toward the door, his footsteps quiet and his breathing shallow. Placing his hand on the handle and exerting enough force to start the door opening, he swung the door open. Kurama asked drowsily, "You do remember what you have to do once you get back to the hideout?" Naruto mentally reprimanded him, saying, "You don't have to check up on me every other minute. I know exactly what I have to do. It's just the problem regarding Itachi." "What of it?" Kurama yawned sleepily. From inside his head, Naruto told Kurama, "He won't let me go anywhere." Kurama retorted sharply, "Well, you're just going to have to insist." Naruto gave him a quiet tut in return. Naruto made the hasty assumption, "I trust Itachi. Maybe if I tell him the truth, he'll be considerate enough to let me go. I've already told you that nobody is to know of this. This situation is only of concern to us and us alone." Kurama sighed angrily to himself. Regardless, Naruto started, "I don't see any other way to persuade him. I can't just walk out without telling him, and I can't pretend to be running errands or anything like that, because he'll know I'm fake. Whatever you feel is the best course of action, I suppose I shall stand by it," Kurama said grudgingly as he sank into a lying position in an effort to reach a deep sleep. Kurama sighed and shook his head once more. Naruto.kun. Pulling on Naruto's sleeve, Hinata asked, We're the hideout's up ahead." Naruto pulled away from his conversation with Kurama and looked at Hinata. We're the hideout's up ahead," Hinata whispered, taking her hand off Naruto's sleeve and pointing to the big wooden shanty cabin. With a deep sigh, Naruto surveyed the hideout and said, "Just expect the worst reaction from Itachi." He assumed aloud, and Hinata shuddered in fear of death as he considered the worst thing Itachi could do to the two of them. The two then proceeded to the front door, where Naruto whispered to himself, "This isn't going to be fun. Are you ready?" Quietly, he asked. Naruto raised his hand from a fist and repeatedly banged on the door, and Hinata nodded quickly before whispering, "Hi." Both Kisame and Itachi were startled by the sudden knocks on the door, and Kisame simply nodded. Itachi then walked slowly to the door, his footsteps quiet and his breathing shallow, and he put his hand on the handle and applied enough force to let the door open. Itachi let out a sigh of relief, but used his Sharingan to make sure it wasn't Hidan and Kakuzu in disguise. Itachi then motioned for Naruto and Hinata to enter the hideout, and he returned to his seat, asking, "Why is there so much silence?" After entering the living room with Hinata, Naruto asked. Kisame laughed quietly to himself and replied jokingly, "Been waiting for you two brats to show up." When Naruto looked at Itachi, he saw a look of disappointment and anger appear on his face right away. "There's no need for that look, Itachi," Naruto said, looking around the room. Itachi lowered himself onto his seat and whispered, "You disobeyed our instructions." Kisame cut in with a humorous tone, "Well, just your instructions really." Naruto and Hinata both grinned at Kisame's unpretentious demeanor. Kisame responded with a small smile and a slight shrug, "We disobeyed you, but it was for a good cow." Itachi turned his head to Kisame and reprimanded him with a facial expression. "Whatever your excuse is, it can wait," Itachi said, raising his hand to cut off Naruto's explanation. "We must relocate immediately, without question, as this place is no longer safe." Itachi motioned for Hinata and Naruto to exit the living room, saying, "Just gather your belongings and come back here." "Are you certain you want to keep Naruto and Hinata in the dark on this?" Kisame asked, rising from his chair. With a sigh, Itachi turned to Kisame and said, "There isn't much more we can do. The less information they have, the better." "What do we know less about?" Kisame and Itachi were both startled by Naruto's question, and Itachi turned around once more to confront him. "What exactly are we moving?" Naruto inquired. Kisame whispered to Itachi, "Now we have no choice but to tell him. The Akatsuki is after us, and they know we're staying in this area." Itachi sighed and cupped his face with both palms of his hands. After a few seconds, he took his hands off his face. "Akatsuki? You worked for those fucks?" As Itachi and Kisame both nodded slowly, Naruto muttered, "Shit?" Kisame said jokingly, "Yeah, that was more or less our reaction as well." Itachi turned to face Naruto and said, "Now this is why we must withdraw from our current position." Kisame nodded and sighed, like a pet when its master calls, but Itachi gave him a menacing look and said, "Now is not the time for jokes, Kisame." Itachi and Kisame both gave Naruto a look of complete bewilderment and urged him to go on, saying, "The Kyuubi told me that somebody is hunting the tailed beasts." "Yeah, well, I have some news as well, none of which is any good." "Akatsuki?" Kisame asked out loud. Naruto snapped back, "No, it's not the Akatsuki. The Kyuubi was very clear about that. Additionally, he informed me that at least 2 tailed beasts have been captured by the hunter." As he flopped on an empty seat, Kisame muttered angrily, "Fucking hell," and rubbed his cheek tenderly with his fingertips. "I would have called you disillusioned if you had told me that someone had managed to capture 1 tailed beast. However, 2 of those idiots? And if I don't do something, this phantom would have captured of all the tailed beasts. However, don't all of the tailed beasts share a mental connection of some kind? They could definitely alert each other to the dangers," Itachi said softly. "You would be correct on any other day. However, the person has succeeded in cutting off the mental connection between all 9 tailed beasts, which can only be accomplished if a tailed beast breaks the connection." Itachi fell to an empty couch seat and said out loud, "This ninja is turning the tailed beasts against one another." "Exactly. Until they have all of the tailed beasts in their possession, this ninja will keep capturing them," Naruto said. "The Kyuubi has requested my aid on this affair," but Kisame mocked the statement, saying, "The Kyuubi is clueless as to what the intentions and motives of the ninja are, but we all know they aren't for the greater good." "Your assistance?" Kisame and Itachi asked simultaneously. "He wants me to seek out the one tail, Shukaku, to see if he knows anything about what's going on." "The only tail? In the sand village? And risk getting caught by the many ninjas inside and outside the walls?" Itachi snorted loudly. "You're a wanted criminal, so you and the Kyuubi must both know that this is the closest a person can come to suicide." Naruto's resolve made Kisame smile. "I've already thought about all of this, but I'm still going. If the Kyuubi needs my help, well then he has it." Itachi sighed before responding, "Why the one tail?" He realized in his mind that Naruto was leaving no matter what he said. Naruto said plainly, "The Kyuubi told me that he was the wisest of all the tailed beasts." "What if he doesn't know anything?" Kisame inquired as his curiosity overcame him. "Then I suppose I'll come back to wherever it is you're moving us to." "Speaking of that," Itachi said hastily, taking a small map out of his large pocket, "if you're not with us, you'll need this." He got up from his chair and put the map in Naruto's gentle hands. "A road map to our new hiding place?" As he closely examined the map, Naruto inquired. "The new hideout is in a town called Angel's Paradise. When you get there, you have to speak the passphrase," Itachi said simply as he collapsed back into his seat. The map read, "He who cometh with anger shall be shunned." Naruto repeated out loud, "What the fuck kind of passphrase is that?" As he carefully tucked the map into his pocket, Naruto posed the question. With a purposeful joke, Kisame said, "Well, it's not our passphrase." Naruto nodded and started putting some of his belongings in a small shoulder bag. "Enough talk," Itachi said, getting up from his chair once more. "We need to get moving, and you need to get to the hidden village of sand as soon as you can." Naruto finished packing after a few minutes and started to head for the front door, saying, "I'll be gone for no more than 5 days." Naruto froze in place and turned to face Itachi, saying, "Wait, Naruto. Hidan and Kakuzu are the Akatsuki members who were hunting us. Avoid them as much as you can because they tend to not die," Itachi said. "Not die, that's fantastic, isn't it?" With those last words, Naruto departed the hideout and started his protracted journey to the village hidden in the sand. "Tell Hinata I won't be gone too long, and make sure she doesn't worry too much about me," he said sarcastically as he threw open the front door. For nearly 20 minutes, the three genins, Lee, Neji, and Ten, had watched the battle between their sensei and their old friend Rajon, with neither of the two fighters surrendering. They had exchanged vicious blows, each one more deadly and shrewd than the last. Guy and Ino, however, had halted their fighting for the time being and turned to talking to each other. "You may have beaten my students," Guy started, "but that does not mean you will defeat me," Guy angrily exclaimed, his inner fire still burning brightly, and his voice carried the words, "You're brave to stand your ground, especially after I've opened all but 2 of the gates." Laughing at Guy's courage, Ino said in a monotone, "Your opening of the gates still won't change the inevitability of your demise. I'm more powerful than you will ever dream of being." This made all 4 of Ino's enemies shudder. "But only one of us will leave this room alive," Guy said, breaking several bones in his neck to relieve the stiffness that had accumulated there. "I have seen firsthand that you are an extremely skilled and powerful opponent." "Do you mean that you will be the winner?" Ino yelled, "I haven't even begun to delve into the midst of my true power." The two started to circle the room while maintaining full eye contact, their vision firmly cemented to one another as they continued to pace in a circle. Guy barely saw the terrifying ball of purple chakra, but he managed to dodge it before it struck him. The ball of chakra tore through the wall behind Guy, leaving an empty room behind, and exploded, reducing the room to nothing more than 1,000 pieces of rubble. "How very lucky you managed to dodge that," Ino said, whistling at the destruction she had caused. "That would have been your demise. A very painless end, if I may say so myself." Ino grinned and used a light touch of her fingertips to brush a few hairs out of her eyes before looking around her and noticing that all 4 of her opponents had the same shocked expressions on their faces. "You and your team look shocked. I assume this was the first time you've seen a jutsu this powerful." As she tapped her foot against the floor in a rhymed pattern, Ino made a sarcastic comment. How in a matter of seconds did you create such a destructive jutsu?" Lee muttered, his voice rough and raspy from the ongoing tension in his head. Ino flicked a few loose hairs away from her eyes once more and said, "The perks of having such substantial power." She said simply, switching between the 4 genins, "Just be grateful the Hokage is a compassionate man, and that he only asked for 1 head and not 4. Focusing entirely on Guy, she said, "You're going to die here." Ino started creating hand seals at a speed that was so fast Guy had never seen in his life. Ino abruptly stopped sealing her hands, and a second big ball of purple chakra materialized in the open palm of her left hand. Before Guy could see it, Ino threw it at him with all the strength she had built up, and the ball of chakra hit Guy in the torso with terrible force, tearing the very flesh from his midsection. Ino was ecstatic when the 3 genins gasped and pleaded, "Guy! Sensei!" as he saw his sensei die in front of his eyes. Lee screamed in shock and tried to stand up but was quickly overcome by the constant agony that was pulsing through his body. "There's nothing you can do for him now, he was dead before this fight even began," Ino said in a chilly, emotionless voice, laughing at the genin's despair. The ball of chakra broke after a few seconds of agony, and Guy collapsed to his knees, the pain too intense for him to bear, and he started to close each of the gates he had opened, the stress of open gates too much for his injured body to bear. "You are a worthy adversary," Guy whispered painfully, clutching his lower ribs erratically, the flesh from his torso torn away, exposing a mass of exposed muscle. His breathing started to increase exponentially, his eyes started to feel heavy, but he poured all of his remaining strength into keeping them open. "If you're going to kill me," Guy struggled to say, removing his now blood-stained hand from his ribs, "just do it already." Ino shrugged her shoulders and said, "If you say so." Ignoring the genin's cries of disapproval, Ino walked over to Guy's bloodied and defeated self and asked, "How do you want it? A little snap of the throat? With my kunai, a quick slit in the throat?" Or perhaps you simply wish to let your present wounds heal? Guy looked up at Ino and spat at her, his saliva overflowing with blood. Ino wiped the spit from her face and grinned. She quickly withdrew a kunai and drove it through Guy's skull, killing him instantly. The three genins screamed in unison as the warm blood poured from Guy's open wound. Ino turned to face the genin and said, "Nothing can bring him back now, not even your cries for help." Ino violently removed the kunai from Guy's skull, and his lifeless body hit the floor with a sickening thud. "What a bitch you are. I'll murder myself." Lee let out a shriek and started to pant violently. Ino looked at Guy's corpse and then back at Lee. "Unless you want to end up like Guy, I suggest you keep your mouth closed." Ino threatened, her voice taking on a venomous quality. Ino crouched down towards Guy's body and placed her kunai on his neck. She performed one large sweep with her arm, severing Guy's head from his body. 10. 10 gagged at the sight of beheading. Ino sheathed her kunai and placed the head in her large bag. Blood began dripping from the bag, and Ino threw the bag towards Lee. "You'll be carrying that." Lee unwillingly caught the bag. Tears began falling from Lee's eyes from the loss of his sensei. Neji and 10 joined Lee in grieving over the loss of Guy. "Stop sobbing and follow me." Ino rose to a standing position and quickly left the room. Neji and 10 soon followed after her, but Lee remained in the room for several minutes in a state of shock. He knelt towards the body of Guy and placed a hand upon his shoulder, his tears continuing to fall. Ino appeared at the door and broke the tranquil atmosphere. "Hurry up, Lee. I think you know first hand that the Hokage is an impatient man." Lee wiped away the tears with the back of his hand and quickly got up and walked towards the door. He shot Ino glares of hate and abhorrence before walking through the door. Ino smiled and closed the door, leaving the carcass of Guy to deteriorate in room 34B. "Why are they doing this to us?" the four asked as they walked out of the hospital and headed for the Hokage's tower. As Ino continued to lead the way, Lee whimpered to his team, "They killed Guy Sensei because he tried to protect Konoha." Unable to control his tears, Lee started crying once more. Neji tried to restore the composure in both of his teammates by saying, "The loss of our sensei is tragic," wiping away a few tears from his eyes. "But we have to be strong, it'd be what he'd want." Lee and 10 sniveled and nodded in response to Neji's statement. "Now we have to make a plan or something of what we're going to do." 10 said wildly, drawing puzzled looks from Lee and Neji. "We have no choice but to join them. You've seen what Ino is capable of, and the Hokage is extremely more powerful than her." 10 said in a croaky voice, "We'll be killed if we don't join them." Looking at the bag that held Guy's severed head, Lee began, "I'd rather die than join them. There's no way I'd do anything for them after what they did to Guy Sensei." Lee sobbed as he lowered the bag out of his line of sight. With a smile on her face, Ino called out from in front of the three, "If you want to speed up for me, it would be much appreciated." She then put her head back in its original position and accelerated her pace, making the three of them walk more quickly as well. 10 is correct, Neji said with a sigh and a nod. Lee gave him a painful look when Neji reluctantly agreed, saying, "I don't like it any more than you do, Lee. It wasn't just your sensei they murdered, he was mine and 10's as well. We haven't a choice in the matter. There is nothing else we can do but join them. And like I said before, I'd rather die than join them." Lee muttered resolutely, "There's also death. It's up to you whether you want to give up and join them." Lee gritted his teeth and whispered, "But I'm not joining them. Shino and the Hokage are the only ones in the Hokage's room, so don't worry." Ino said, pointing to the Hokage's tower, "We're here." The three genins soon followed her as she started up the stairs toward the hallway, and she opened two large wooden doors to reveal a long hallway covered in picture frames but without any actual photographs. "Don't mind the lack of photos," she said. "The Hokage dislikes having his picture taken." Ino started down the corridor, with Lee, Neji, and 10 trailing closely behind. When they reached another big wooden door after walking for a while, Ino knocked and said, "It's open." A loud voice called from the other side, and Ino quickly opened the door. "Ah, Ino-chan, I was wondering when you'd get back," the Hokage exclaimed with pleasure. "And you brought the genins? I hope you looked after Guy." Ino grabbed the bag from Lee and threw it at the Hokage, who chuckled ominously and opened it to reveal Guy's severed head. "Very well done, Ino." The Hokage signaled the genins to come in, and they did as he said, and Ino shut the door after them before standing next to Shino, who was standing by the desk. As she looked around the room, Ino whispered to Shino, "You cleaned the room well." Shino gave an unintelligible grunt in response. "With us, what do you want?" Lee asked, his eyes red with tears and his voice troubled. Lee's enthusiasm made the Hokage smile. Did I not say that it was a good idea to recruit them? This level of eagerness is exactly what we need, the Hokage said to Ino and Shino. He got up from his chair and walked over to the Genins, placing a hand on Lee's rigid shoulders and saying, I want you Genins to join us. We need someone to fill the void left by the deaths of Sakura and Kiba. The Hokage clicked his fingers, and Shino nodded. But we only need 2 of you, and since Lee was the closest to Guy, the Hokage said, clutching Lee's shoulder and causing him to scream in agony before throwing him at Shino. We won't be needing him. Lee, no. When Neji screamed, the Hokage restrained Ten and Neji, enabling Shino to carry out his assigned task. Hundreds of bugs emerged from beneath Shino's clothing as he muttered a few words under his breath. I've been told that being eaten alive is among the most tormenting feelings in the world. Shino whispered as the bugs started to crawl in Lee's direction. Lee started to scurry across the floor and attempted to get up to defend himself, but it was in vain because the bugs had already started to crawl up Lee's body and Neji and Ten could do nothing to stop them. The bugs crawled under Lee's clothing and started eating the flesh right out of Lee's bones, saying, no, no, no. Ten and Neji were stunned. They had never witnessed such suffering before. Lee screamed, as the warm flesh was ripped from his body. Lee started frantically swatting the bugs, but there were too many. The bugs continued eating Lee's flesh, causing thick drops of blood to fall from the numerous wounds on him, staining the lush carpet. Ino laughed at Lee's death, and the Hokage gave himself a small smile at the sight of blood. Looks like he's dead, Ino said, grabbing his hair and moving his head around to make sure, as she removed her hand and wiped it on her clothes to remove Lee's blood from her hand. After a few minutes, Lee's lifeless body slumped to the floor face first, and the bugs continued to eat his remaining flesh before removing themselves from his carcass. Ino then walked over to Lee's body and turned him over on his back, whistling at the skinless face that greeted her. Well done, Shino, the Hokage said, clapping his hands in celebration. The Hokage turned to face the stunned Neji and Ten, saying, as I mentioned before, I want you both to join us. Shino nodded and instructed his bugs to completely devour Lee's remains. If you refuse, you will only end up like Guy and Lee. Neji took a big swallow and grudgingly nodded his head, saying, we'll join you. Ten cried and nodded shakily as the Hokage grinned and looked at her. Why? Yes, I'll join. With another smile, the Hokage approached his desk and said, I hope Ino hasn't revealed my identity to you. As he started to take off the mask covering his face, the Hokage said simply, you've probably heard stories about me, and they're all undoubtedly true. Neji and Ten both shook their heads. Good. The Hokage then proceeded to remove his mask, dropping it on the floor and scratching his cheek before saying, they call me Orochimaru. He smiled before adding, and your first mission is to find Naruto and Hinata, and eliminate them both. A sharp pain throbbed in Hinata's lower chest, and she then used a delicate hand to grasp the point where the pain protruded before kneeling and giving in to the overwhelming agony. Looking up, she was relieved to see that the Hokage tower was just a few moments away. Hinata painfully stood up and proceeded to the tower despite the excruciating pain that was still going through her body. Bloodied and bruised from training with her unforgiving father, Hinata eventually reached the Hokage's tower after a few more minutes of walking. Her footsteps were nimble as she ascended the intimidating stairs leading to the elder's office, and after a few more minutes, she reached the top of the stairs, gasping for air and in pain. She continued to clutch her lower chest and looked around the hallway, noticing a door labeled, the elder's office, a few meters away. She sighed in relief as she limped to the door and knocked absently a few times. Yes, just a minute. An elderly woman screamed from behind the door, and after a few seconds, the door opened slowly, saying, Hinata-chan. The elderly woman questioned with surprise once the door was opened. The old woman studied Hinata for several seconds, and instantly noticed her blood-stained attire. Oh dear. Whatever happened to you? Never mind that, the woman said, raising a hand before Hinata could respond. Please enter. Grabbing Hinata by the hand, she dragged her firmly into the room before slamming the door shut behind her. After studying the room for a few minutes and sitting on the vacant couch in the corner, Hinata said, there's something URG. As a warm draft of air embraced her inside the room, easing some of her pain. Homura. The elderly woman interrupted loudly, forcing Hinata to clench her ears with her open palms. We have a guest. The woman screamed once more. There were several loud noises coming from the other room, and then a loud voice said, all right, Komura, give me a minute. Another elderly voice shouted. Several seconds after the voice spoke, the door the voice protruded from swung open with force, revealing an elderly man with an annoyed expression across his face. What is it you want? When Homura saw Hinata's battered and bloodied body, his voice trailed off. You know perfectly well that I'm sleepy. What in the world happened to you? He sat down next to Hinata and asked. After an awkward period of silence, Hinata grudgingly responded, training with my father. After hearing the cause of Hinata's condition, Komura shook her head and tutted. Those Hyuga can be vile creatures. She whispered as she applied a few hand seals and then put her chakra infused hands on Hinata's shoulders. This won't take a minute. She grinned at Hinata, and almost immediately, she felt the pain inside her subside. What are you here for? Homura asked. I'm sure you haven't come to us just so we can look at your wounds. As Komura took her hands away from Hinata, he inquired. Komura and Homura exchanged worried, concerned glances but said nothing. The Hokage is not who he says he is. He plans to extinguish Konoha, reducing it to mere rubble. Hinata grinned at Komura's generosity and turned to face Homura. There's something I only found out recently that demands your attention, Hinata said, her voice barely audible above a whisper. Homura mocked Hinata's assertions, saying, and you think we'll believe you? Hinata, you're making some very grave charges, but what if you're mistaken? But it's all true. All of the genin have sworn loyalty to the Hokage, who has used them to further his agenda. Incredulous, Komura shook her head, but not you? No. Sakura and Kiba approached me several days ago to see if I would join their cause, but I was unwilling, replied Hinata. As Homura stated, these are extremely serious charges. Komura approached the door and slowly swung it open, saying, we're going to have to ask you to forget about any and all affairs linked with the Hokage. Just keep whatever accusations you have to yourself, Komura said, gesturing for Hinata to leave the room due to the lack of proof. However, Tsunade was killed by the Hokage. In a desperate statement that startled both Komura and Homura, Hinata said, Ino told me that the 6th did murder the 5th, and that he also knows you have your doubts of her supposed suicide. The 6th is not to be trusted. Komura slowly closed the door while keeping eye contact with Hinata. Hinata sobbed, her voice barely audible. Komura positioned herself next to Hinata, and after exchanging anxious looks with Homura, Komura put a caring hand on Hinata's shoulder and asked, are you sure about this? Naturally, she is positive. Homura quickly responded, tapping his foot frantically on the ground. I never trusted the 6th. No one would blame a ninja of a crime of this magnitude. There has always been something fishy about him, and he refuses to even show us his face or even tell us his name. What should we do? Komura asked hastily, taking her hand off Hinata's sensitive shoulder. Isn't it clear? Homura turned to Hinata and said, what exactly is the Hokage planning to do? We have to stop him before he kills anyone else. He plans to destroy Konoha, to eradicate the ninjas and villagers, and then to rebuild it in his own image. After Hinata finished speaking, there was a prolonged pause, which Komura broke first by asking, and who did you say was aiding him? Hinata trembled, just the genins, with the exception of Naruto and I. With a heavy sigh, Homura said, so you and Naruto are the only ones we can give this mission to, Hinata. You and Naruto are the only two who can stop the Hokage. By no means will this be simple, particularly if the Hokage is as corrupt as you claim. What will be difficult? Hinata shuffled in her seat and asked grudgingly. The Hokage must be stopped, Homura reiterated, and the only way for you to do that is if you defect from Konoha. Homura spoke slowly as he and Komura exchanged another worried glance. Defect? Hinata said, raising an eyebrow in perplexity. Are you referring to becoming missing? Nins? Why is the O? Only way that way? Hinata's stutter came back with remarkable skill. Because we must strike not only the Hokage, but his followers as well, Homura murmured. You're saying that we must kill the genins? With every word, Hinata's stutter became more noticeable as she asked. With a solemn nod, Homura stated without emotion, that is precisely what I mean. But why is it always Naruto and me? Naruto and I can't possibly do this. Surely the Chunin or Junin can. Maybe, but are they trustworthy? We trust you and Naruto can fulfill this mission, Komura said hastily, putting her hand on Hinata's shoulder. Maybe some of the Chunin and Junin have also joined the Hokage. There was a moment of silence, and then Komura asked, good, and Hinata shook her head. Then it's settled. Homura said plainly, essentially securing the mission, this needs to be as plausible as possible in order to succeed. It's no secret that you love Naruto, and young love is the most dangerous entity in our world, Hinata said, blushing deeply at the mention of lust. The Hokage must be persuaded that you became missing. Nins for other reasons, such as lust. Your love for one another would be justified if you eliminated both Sakura and Kiba. After saying, I don't need to explain why, Homura grabbed a tiny cup of tea from the desk in front of him, raised it to his lips, and took a few tiny sips. We need to inform both yours and Naruto's sensei of this condition, he said. Hinata blurted, but you just said that we can't trust the Junin. Kurenai and Kakashi have shown the same devotion to Konoha as the original 5 Hokage. Before taking a few more sips of his tea, Homura said, we can trust them with our lives. What happens when the mission is finished? Silently, Hinata inquired. As he placed his cup of tea gently on the old wooden table, Homura explained, by that time, the exploits of the 6th will have been revealed to all, so you should have no trouble returning to Konoha, given of course the Hokage and all his followers have been dealt with. We need to persuade everyone in the village that you became missing. Nins for other reasons, as Homura previously stated. I hate to break it to you, Hinata, but you have to kill Kiba, and Naruto has to kill Sakura. Hinata felt her eyes widen in fear, and a few tiny tears escaped her eyes. Naruto's love for Sakura is painfully obvious to everyone, but only a few people are aware of Kiba's love for you. Hinata reddened violently, tearing her vision away from Komura and replacing it with the lush carpet on the floor. I can't even begin to imagine how you feel, but you have to realize that what you and Naruto must do is best for Konoha as a whole. You must, of course, keep this mission a secret and wait until you and Naruto are prepared to confront the Hokage before you return to Konoha. Komura concluded, Kakashi, Kurenai, Homura, and I will try our best to keep the situation under control from within Konoha. What about Asuma? Sensei? Hinata questioned tremblingly, surely he can be trusted. Hinata gave Komura a worried look, which made Komura raise a hand. You needn't worry about mine and Homura's thoughts, Komura said, gently shaking her head. He may have been the son of the 3rd, and a member of the 12 Guardian Ninja, but Homura and I have always had our doubts as to whether he was working for or against Konoha. You just need to be aware that Asuma is not as trustworthy as Kurenai and Kakashi. Kiba is my friend and a member of my team, Hinata said, letting out a deep breath and leaning back on the couch. Hinata muttered, I don't want to kill him. It's as easy as that, Homura said icily, still sipping his tea, if you don't kill him first, he will kill you. This also applies to Naruto. This mission begins as soon as you leave this office, so you have to wait for Naruto somewhere you both know. You need to attend to your end. Komura pointed to the door and said, you should be leaving now. Kakashi will come look for you once you've left Konoha. And one more thing, Hinata said, nodding and blotting away her tears as she got up from the couch and walked slowly to the door. Your father will undoubtedly be wondering where you wandered off to. It is crucial that you inform Naruto, Kakashi, and Kurenai that we have summoned them. Hinata nodded slowly before opening the door and leaving the room. I never trusted the Hokage. Komura muttered, clenching her fist, as she left the room. Homura's voice lost all sense of humor as he said, yet another thing we have in common. Konoha has been through a lot of dire situations, but this is beyond dire. I never would have suspected any of what Hinata just told us, Homura said. The Hokage and all of his supporters will eventually be held accountable. Komura agreed, saying, even if it's the last thing we do. A few minutes later, a recognizable knock on the door prompted Homura and Komura to exchange quick looks before Komura calmly said, come in. The door opened quickly, revealing a tall, gray-haired man and a woman with black hair. We met Hinata, and she told us you needed to talk to us, the woman said. As he and Kurenai walked into the room, Kakashi said, she also said it was urgent. He shut the door behind them and asked, so, what is so important to interrupt my mid-day stroll? Kurenai stayed upright and leaned against the wall, while Kakashi sat himself on an empty seat and asked in a straightforward and languid manner. After taking a few deep breaths, Homura said as simply as he could, the Hokage is plotting to destroy Konoha, and he's using the genins to do it. Both Kurenai and Kakashi narrowed their eyes and said, what do you mean by destroy Konoha? What are you discussing? Kurenai scratched her bewildered head and asked. All the ninjas and villagers inside Konoha's walls who do not join him in this crusade will be killed by the Hokage, who intends to destroy the entire city. Naturally, he needs to be stopped before his schemes are carried out. Komura responded promptly. This isn't possible. Didn't Hinata provide you with this information? How many of the genins are under the influence of the Hokage? Kakashi whispered incredulously, the genins who have been deluded by the Hokage must have tried to recruit Hinata. That would explain why she came to you with this information. Komura and Homura nodded at the same time. From what Hinata said, It seems like all of them, with the exception of herself and Naruto. Every one of them? Kiba and Shino included? Kurenai asked in a combative manner. Reluctantly, Homura said, unfortunately, yes. In a fit of rage, Kurenai ripped herself from the wall and fell to an empty seat. Given the situation, Kakashi maintained his composure, but he thought out loud, so, Sakura is part of the Hokage's plan as well. He then clenched his fist, saying, you couldn't have called us just to tell us this fact. I take it that you want us to take action? Kakashi's normally serene tone vanished entirely as he asked. This mission has been given to you, Hinata, Naruto and Kurenai with much regret, but it must be done. Komura replied quietly, Naruto and Hinata was eliminate Kiba and Sakura in order to become missing nins. Angry at what they had just heard, Kakashi and Kurenai quickly stood up, exclaiming, you want to kill the very ninjas we were meant to train and protect? There's no need for this bloodshed, yelled Kakashi, hammering his fist hard against the wooden table. We can talk the genins out of this. There's no reason to kill the people we were trying to protect. Kurenai concurred, saying, Kakashi's right, bloodshed is pointless. We should try to persuade the genins that they have chosen the wrong path. We've already spoken with Hinata about this. Regretfully, this problem cannot be resolved in any other way. As though a viscous, poisonous fluid were oozing from his throat, Homura said savagely, the genins are obviously too fond of the Hokage to betray him, like they have betrayed Konoha. I can't believe the genins would willingly do this to Konoha, Kakashi said softly as he lowered himself slowly in his seat. There has to be an error, Kurenai boldly said, tapping her foot steadily against the floor, the Sakura that Kakashi and I know would never do this. The Kiba and Shino I know would never voluntarily turn against the very village they were raised in. Perhaps Hinata simply became confused with. Kurenai, you have to see things for what they truly are. There's no point in clinging to unrealistic hope. Whether the genins made their choice voluntarily or under duress is irrelevant. The fact that they have to pay for their treason is all that matters. Before you leave, there is a certain task for the both of you, Komura said, pointing to the door, essentially signaling for Kakashi and Kurenai to leave the room. I know this must be painful for you to hear, especially given that you're the senseis of those genins that must meet their untimely end, but if this doesn't happen now, it will be the end of Konoha. After they depart, Naruto and Hinata will require regular assistance from Konoha. Homura finished quickly, receiving a small nod from Kurenai and Kakashi. We trust you both with seeking out Naruto and Hinata, and aiding them in whatever way you can, be it by means of information or training. That was unexpected, Kakashi said dryly as Kurenai shut the door after them. I'm still shocked at the elder's request. Kakashi quickly opened the door and left the room, followed shortly after by Kurenai. Kurenai started to move away from the wooden door and start down the hallway, saying, I don't like it any more than you do. But if the elders say it's the best thing to do. What the elders have to say doesn't matter to me. It's just not fair, Kakashi interrupted abruptly, shaking his head violently. They want to kill Sakura, the very ninja I swore to protect, and they want Naruto to do it. With this mission, we would be more capable. After a few seconds of silence, Kakashi looked at Kurenai and gently nodded his head, saying, Kakashi, you have to see things for what they are. Kurenai tried to comfort the upset Kakashi, saying, the elder's choice may not be agreeable with you, but it is in the best interest of Konoha. Kurenai and Kakashi departed the Hokage's tower in complete silence after saying, if the Hokage finds us here, he'll be suspicious. After a few minutes, the two arrived at the doors that led back to Konoha. I need to get home and think, Kakashi said in a distressed voice as he slowly opened the large double doors, which revealed magnificent structures and blinding sunlight. I'll see you later, Kakashi said once more as he started to walk towards his house with both hands in his pockets and his back bent. Kurenai sighed, dissatisfied with the elder's choice to kill Kiba and Sakura, and turned back to the streets of Konoha as she watched Kakashi leave into the distance. She then walked back into the Hokage's tower, shutting the big doors behind her to stop the light from entering the massive, intimidating structure. After returning to the Hokage's tower, Kurenai made her way to the Hokage's office. It took her only 2 minutes to ascend the intimidating stairwell that led back to the spacious hallway. She started down the hall and saw a number of picture frames that were empty of photographs. She dismissed the thought and soon saw the Hokage's office out of the corner of her eye. She approached the door and knocked on it multiple times, saying, come in. A voice called from the other side of the door, and Kurenai quickly opened it, saying, ah, Kurenai. I owe the pleasure to please close the door behind you, the Hokage said with a smile as he stood up. Kurenai nodded and entered the office, shutting the door behind her. So, what do you want? You are aware that I dislike those who unexpectedly try to get an audience. The Hokage returned to his seat. With her voice barely audible above a whisper, Kurenai said, "Hokage. Sama, there's something that demands your attention." The Hokage looked up expectantly and motioned for Kurenai to continue, saying, "The plan to recruit Hinata failed." The Hokage put both hands on his desk and tutted softly, "Ah, a pity. Is that all?" Kurenai grudgingly gave a gentle shake of her head, saying, "No. There's more. Hinata explained our plan to the elders." After inhaling deeply and exhaling violently a few seconds later, the Hokage said, "The elders have always been suspicious of me. Their suspicions have now been confirmed." The Hokage rose from his chair and walked slowly to the window that looked out over Konoha. "This entire village will soon be under our control," he said. The Hokage turned away from the window and looked at Kurenai, saying, "How much do the elders know? If they, or anyone else, for that matter, stand in our way, they must be removed." "Not much, but enough to take action. They know that you plan to purify Konoha, and they know that all but 2 of the genins have joined you." The Hokage mumbled in relief, "But they don't know the others that have joined our cause. But who else knows? The only other person is Kakashi." "Kakashi? He doesn't pose much of an issue," the Hokage said with a smile. "How are the elders going to use the data they have collected?" After asking, he went back to his seat. The Hokage motioned for Kurenai to continue, saying, "They have given both Naruto and Hinata a mission to become missing nins in order to stop us. They plan to use Naruto and Hinata to eliminate us." Kurenai muttered, "They will become missing nins by destroying both Kiba and Sakura in front of the entire village." "Kiba and Sakura? They'll know someone who was with the elders when Hinata told them is working for me if we do anything to stop it. It's unfortunate, but there is nothing we can do to spare Kiba and Sakura," the Hokage thought out loud. "So we simply let them perish?" Kurenai asked, her voice containing a characteristic venom. "That's precisely what we need to do. Consider both of them martyrs for our cause. You assured me that all of the genins would be safe when I joined you, you stated." The Hokage abruptly cut me off, saying, "It doesn't matter what I said. The genins were aware of the dangers and knew that joining me could mean their demise. Trying to hide my identity from everyone makes it very hard to keep anyone safe." After exhaling heavily in exasperation, Kurenai nodded her head and asked, "What do you want me to do then?" Kurenai nodded once more in response to the Hokage's wishes, saying, "Good. To keep acting as you have been. The elders and Kakashi must remain oblivious to the fact that you're on my side. Before I forget, Asuma asked me to let you know that he wanted to talk to you when he stopped by earlier. He's almost as impatient as I am, so you shouldn't keep him waiting." The Hokage gave one final smile before Kurenai hurried out of the room. After 12 minutes, Kurenai was back on the streets of Konoha, where she could see the gorgeous sunlight blotting out the dark shadows in every direction. Suddenly, she recalled that Asuma had wanted to talk to her, so she hurried to Asuma's house. Kurenai muttered bitterly under her breath. She knew that the sudden influx of people in the streets would only slow her down. She pushed past several villagers in the hopes of reaching the Asuma's house sooner rather than later. Pushing and shoving her way through a large crowd of villagers proved difficult without aggravating them. Kurenai continued to illuminate the heavy shadows that once polluted the streets of Konoha, and many of the villagers ventured outside, populating the very streets. The warm sunlight and the early cries of the numerous birds capturing the villagers. With a sigh of relief that she was no longer required to be near the many villagers, Kurenai looked around to orient herself and soon saw Asuma's house in the distance, and she started to walk, her footsteps barely perceptible as they tapped against the stone roofs. Leaping from rooftop to rooftop, it took Kurenai close to 6 minutes to reach Asuma's house. Conveniently enough, the area surrounding Asuma's house was as populated as the harsh desert, making it easy for Kurenai to jump to the streets without being slowed down by any villagers. Kurenai brushed some dirt from her clothes and looked down either end of the street. Kurenai was unable to see another soul. She shrugged, and slowly made her way to Asuma's front door. Kurenai studied Asuma's porch for several seconds as she passed through it. The lush grass grew to some height, reaching as far as Kurenai's knee. The bright color of the stone path was beginning to fade with time, taking on a duller color compared to the original candy red. Kurenai was just opposite the front door. She raised her hand, formed a fist, as brought it close to the door. Before she had a chance to knock, the door swung open. "I thought I heard something outside," Asuma cheerfully stated, as he gestured for Kurenai to enter the house. Kurenai simply nodded and walked past Asuma. He then closed the door. Kurenai entered the tiny house to find it completely dark. All the lights were off, and the dusty coat covering the windows prevented any light from entering the room. As she coughed, the musty atmosphere of the stuffy room filled her lungs, and she immediately noticed a lot of things lying around on the floor, including empty ramen pots, various pieces of filthy clothes, and half-eaten food. Asuma just watched as Kurenai made her way through his filthy front room until she reached a spot next to an unclean dresser, and she leaned on it uncomfortably. "I see you've been keeping the house in shape since I was last here," she said sarcastically, her voice cold and heartless. Grasping the back of his head, Asuma grinned and said, "Yeah, I've just been busy." "The Hokage told me you wanted to speak with me," Kurenai muttered. What could be so significant? Her tone was almost bored as she asked. "Yes." Asuma walked slowly to his bed and sat down, saying, "It's about the Hokage. Obviously, I didn't make you come all this way just to see my mess." HMPH. When does the Hokage never come up? How about him? Kurenai muttered to herself. Asuma took a deep breath and then exhaled loudly and silently. He reached into his pocket and took out a small pack of cigarettes, putting one in his mouth and saying, "Well, it's not really about the Hokage himself, but more about the genins." With the cigarette in his mouth, Asuma's words were a little muffled, but Kurenai could still clearly hear him. "Shikamaru told me the other day that he wants to be more actively involved in helping the Hokage." "Why are you telling me this? Then, tell the Hokage yourself, please." Kurenai yawned loudly after asking Asuma. Asuma lit his cigarette and took a few puffs, saying simply, "The Hokage is fonder of you than he is of me." "Now you're just making excuses." Kurenai grumbled bitterly, "You were the first to join the Hokage. And you had the foresight of knowing Ino would be of great use to the Hokage." "I may have been the first to join, but that doesn't make me his favorite," Asuma said, blowing out the smoke he had trapped in his lungs after taking another big puff from his cigarette. "He would get rid of me right away if he could, but he knows you would reciprocate if he did." Asuma took another drag from his cigarette, and as Kurenai coughed, the misty air gave way to the intoxicating smell of smoke. Asuma took a drag and exhaled, looking at his lit cigarette for a moment before realizing it was about halfway burnt. He set the cigarette on an ashtray and said, "Which is why I need you to get Shikamaru higher up in the Hokage's good books, as he likes to put it." Asuma asked Kurenai, "What exactly does Shikamaru want?" Kurenai shrugged. She inquired. Resuming his cigarette, Asuma blew on the euphoric fumes and exhaled the smoke, saying, "All he told me was that he didn't want to be left out of all the action. He wants a more direct approach concerning the objectives of the Hokage." "Is that it? He wants the same job as Kiba and Sakura, then?" she inquired before abruptly recalling that Sakura and Kiba were probably going to be killed. Asuma shrugged and put out his cigarette, saying, "I guess so." Asuma gave a worried nod, and Kurenai bit her lower lip softly before whispering, "There's also something you need to know. Kiba and Sakura, they're going to be killed." Asuma laughed after a few moments of silence, saying, "Come on Kurenai, I never knew your sense of humor was that dark." Asuma saw Kurenai's serious expression and realized she was serious, saying, "Fuck, you're not kidding." Questions then started to race through Asuma's head, asking, "Why? How? What's going on?" The Hokage attempted to enlist Hinata in an effort to increase the number of people he could trust. Hinata obviously had different ideas and told the elders everything. "Fuck," Asuma repeated, leaning back until his back touched the wall. "So, the elders know everything about the Hokage then?" With concern, he asked. "No, not everything, just what Hinata knows, which isn't that much. All she told the elders was the Hokage's plan, and that the genins have joined the Hokage. I'll venture a guess. Because of their knowledge, the Hokage intends to murder the elders? That's unfortunate," Kurenai said with a simple nod. "Always, I enjoyed Homura. Does anyone else know?" "Kakashi. Kakashi was always in the wrong place at the wrong time," Asuma said, closing his eyes and lowering his head a little. "Unfortunately, the Hokage will also have to deal with him." Kurenai just nodded again. "Oh, murder Naruto and Hinata?" Ten asked, her voice breaking and her words stuttering. As he withdrew from Ten and Neji, Orochimaru muttered, "I'm sure you both heard me the first time. I'm sure you're capable of taking a life." He questioned oratorically, as he smiled to himself. "Good. Ino. Go get Kurenai." Ino replied with a grunt that was incoherent. "She will be necessary to us." Kurenai. "Sensei. Does she also work for you?" Before spitting disrespectfully on the carpet, Neji grunted, "Who else have you coerced into doing your dirty work?" Neji wheezed for a few seconds as the sudden force of Ino's punch forced all the oxygen out of his lungs, and then Ino lunged towards him and punched him in the stomach, sending him to the ground in a flurry of pain. "I haven't manipulated anyone," Ino said. "The majority of those who work with me, not for me, did so voluntarily. Had to be convinced by other means," Orochimaru said, purposefully staring at Guy's severed head. So what do you want with us?" Neji stood up. Neji inquired. "Neji, do you not listen well? You and Ten. Ten have to get rid of Naruto and Hinata, Orochimaru asked rhetorically. He walked back to his seat and sat down, saying, of course, the sooner the better. Ino, we need Kurenai. Ino nodded and quickly left the room, saying, Shino, return home. Find her. Shino nodded and hurried out of the room, saying, and then there were two. Orochimaru chuckled to himself. I'm very sorry about Lee. Your parents might wonder where you are. You have to realize that when it comes to hiring, I have to take a few precautions. In a spiteful whisper, Ten said, you're a savage. Now, that's not the proper way to address the man who is in charge of your life, is it? Orochimaru inquired. Kurenai will give you a detailed rundown of what to do when she arrives. You have to realize that you have to get rid of these pests. They are getting more and more annoying. This should serve as sufficient motivation if that isn't enough. Naruto and Hinata were the only reasons I had to get rid of Guy. I wouldn't have needed to take matters into my own hands to get rid of them if it weren't for them. I understand that losing a friend can be upsetting, but death is a common hazard in this life. Just then, there was a soft knock on the door. That would be Kurenai. Enter. Kurenai and Ino entered through the open door. You called, Hokage? Sama? Kurenai inquired. Plan B is operational. He simply said, you know what to do, and motioned for the three of them to exit the room. Kurenai turned to face the genin and nodded, saying, come with me. Neji and Ten grudgingly followed Kurenai out of the room, saying, we have a lot of work to do. Ino said, nodding before shutting the door. Will you kill the genins for me when they're done with their task? With her desire for violence just a few seconds away from being satisfied, Ino responded gleefully, consider it done Hokage. Sama. Kakashi looked out of his window overlooking Konoha, and he could easily see the scene where Sakura and Kiba's deaths would be presented. He shook his head multiple times, frustrated with everything, but especially with himself, because he had promised to keep his genin safe, and now he had failed with Sakura. He punched the wall violently while watching, his eyes wide with worry and his body frozen with anticipation. After a few minutes, he saw Hinata unsheathe the kunai, and his heart began to race, knowing that the worst was yet to come. Akamaru. Kiba's scream shattered the still air, and Kakashi could only watch helplessly as Hinata quickly put an end to Kiba's pet dog. Then, Kakashi watched as Naruto took the stage and launched a barrage of vicious attacks at Sakura, unable to take his eyes off the grisly scene. The villagers' cries and cries of fear rang in Kakashi's ears, so much so that he covered both of them with his hands. Once more, Kakashi's helplessness was evident as he watched Naruto and Hinata brutally kill Sakura and Kiba, and he knew that there was nothing he could do to save them. Using all of his strength, he tore himself away from the window and collapsed on his bed, staring at the ceiling for a few moments in complete silence until the sounds of battle and the villagers' screams abruptly stopped. Kakashi sat up on his bed and looked out, and the sight that met his eyes shook him to his very being. Sakura's lifeless corpse sprawled across the floor, her entrails uncovered, her skull reduced to tiny pieces of bone. He collapsed to the ground, falling on his knees, his back slumped, and he felt several tears form in his eyes. Naruto. I apologize for not being able to protect you, Kakashi said those 14 words repeatedly. Then one tear escaped his eye. The two genins that were left were led by Kurenai down the lengthy, dim hallway. Neji and Ten's eyes danced along the walls, trying to numb the strong sense of fear that was pulsing through them. Why is the Hokage doing this to us? He killed Lee, and he did it for enjoyment, Ten said in an erratic whisper to her friend. Neji returned the whisper, he's a sick individual Ten, he wants us to fear him. Ten responded in a panicked whisper, well, he's getting exactly what he wants. I've never been more scared before in my life. Neji paused to collect his thoughts before continuing, it won't be pleasant, but we have to do everything in our power to kill Naruto and Hinata. Neji saw Ten hang her head in distress and said, I don't like it any more than you do, but you know as well as I do that it has to be done. Neji whispered jokingly, I know what you mean. We should just do what the Hokage says and he'll leave us alone. Yes, I am aware of that, but they are our friends. We cannot ignore this fact and treat them like savage animals. Ten gave Neji a look of complete disgust and said, you heard what the Hokage said. If it weren't for Naruto and Hinata, we would have been left out of all this carnage and bloodshed. Neji said icily, they stopped being our friends when they got our sensei and Lee killed. Don't pretend that you're paying attention to what the Hokage said. Ten muttered angrily, you know he's just trying to manipulate you to do his bidding. Neji quickly wiped away the tears that welled up in his eyes with the back of his hand. Be that as it may, Neji said, It still doesn't change the fact that he's right. Naruto and Hinata had a part to play in Guy and Lee's death, and I'm not stopping until I avenge the death of my sensei and my best friend. But your eyes were opened by Naruto. Hinata is your cousin, your own blood relative, and he was the one who transformed you into a better person. 10. 10 started subtly begging for Naruto and Hinata to be spared, saying, "You can't just kill them." Neji said sourly, "They're already dead to me." 10. 10 looked away from Neji and at Kurenai, opening her mouth to say something but finding nothing to say because she was afraid of Kurenai. What are we going to do? Kurenai remained silent, only her shallow breathing could be heard, but 10 plucked up the courage to ask, "Kurenai, what are we going to be doing?" Kurenai did not respond when 10 asked again, this time with more vigor in her voice. "Kurenai, respond to us. What will we be doing?" Neji nearly yelled, his annoyance growing too great to control. She responded icily and without hesitation, "I'll answer any questions you have once we leave Konoha." 10 and Neji both gulped in silence and exchanged a worried glance. "Why aren't we able to discuss it right now?" Neji boldly asked, his voice cracking as he spoke. Neji and 10 looked over their shoulder to where Kurenai was looking, but all they saw was darkness. Kurenai quickly turned her head around and started walking faster, saying, "Come on. The sooner we get out of Konoha, the sooner we can finish this mission." Neji and 10 also accelerated their pace, and the three of them fled the Hokage's tower in a matter of minutes. "Because somebody's watching us," she said softly as she peered over her shoulder. A lone figure appeared in the dark shadows of the hallway. So, he murmured to himself, the Hokage was up to something all along. The figure vanished back into the darkness. The Hokage's tower doors flew open, and Kurenai, Neji, and 10 emerged first. The town of Konoha was enveloped in a perpetual blackness, but a tiny amount of light was provided by the bright stars and crystal moon, which allowed Kurenai, Neji, and 10 to see through the darkness. Kurenai took a deep breath of fresh air and sighed in relief. "Now listen," she said, continuing to walk. "I will brief you on what needs to be done once we are outside the gates. I want to complete this mission as soon as possible, so be quiet and don't get lost until then." Kurenai asked, "Kurenai, may I just ask you one question?" 10 and Neji both nodded. 10 gave Neji a worried look when he asked. Kurenai looked at Neji over her left shoulder and sighed, "I guess so, as long as it's not related to the mission. What are you interested in knowing?" After giving it some thought, Neji decided he wanted to learn more about the Hokage's scheme. "Who else is collaborating with the Hokage?" Quietly, he asked. Kurenai let out another sigh and reoriented her head. "You're a nosy genin, aren't you, Neji? Is it just you, or are all Hyuga this annoying? You already know all of the genins work for the Hokage, except, of course, Naruto, Hinata, Lee, and Sasuke," Kurenai asked in a lighthearted and rhetorical manner before giggling to herself. "Kiba and Sakura did collaborate with the Hokage, until their untimely deaths. A lot of the Junin also work with the Hokage," she said sloppily before realizing what she had said and keeping quiet. "What does a lot of the Junin mean to you?" Neji inquired. "Who specifically?" Neji asked boldly. Kurenai took another deep breath and said, "Asuma." She knew Neji would not stop bugging her about this subject, so she said, "I'm only going to give you one of them, Junin. The Hokage will not be happy with me if I told you everything." She muttered, "He was the first to work with the Hokage." "Who was the first, Asuma?" "He initiated all of this, then." Quietly, 10 inquired. "I only said I'd answer one question." Kurenai responded, "We're here now anyway." Neji and 10 noticed the big gates leading out of Konoha in the distance and said, "Once we leave, there's no going back. Until Naruto and Hinata are both dead, we cannot go back. If we do and they are still alive, the Hokage will kill us for our ineptitude, just as he did to Guy." As they entered the gates, Neji declared with assurance, "We don't plan to fail." Kurenai said, "I'm glad to hear it." She grinned and turned into the verdant forest, saying softly, "This way." Neji and 10 simply followed her instructions, saying, "Our scouts tracked Naruto and Hinata several miles away from Konoha. They claimed to have witnessed Naruto and Hinata enter an abandoned home that had once served as a hiding place for the Akatsuki. This could indicate one of three things. Naruto and Hinata joined the Akatsuki. They discovered this house on their own. Neji came to the conclusion, or someone from the Akatsuki is helping Naruto and Hinata. Yes. Whatever circumstance Naruto and Hinata find themselves in is irrelevant," Kurenai said icily. "It doesn't matter if they die," pushing a big bush aside to make room for her. How much time will it take to get to this residence? Quietly, 10 inquired. A few days at most, based on whether we need to pause and recuperate. Thus, conserve your energy and remain silent, Kurenai said. Naruto had been walking for close to 1 day now. He was getting closer to the village hidden in the sand, and once he did, he could unravel the mystery surrounding the tailed beasts. The warm sun shone high in the sky, sending hot rays of sunlight towards the ground. Naruto could feel his body perspire, and leisurely wiped away some beads of sweat from his forehead. He removed his large coat and wrapped the arms of the coat around his waist, as to keep his mobility as high as possible. The soothing cries of wildlife filled the land with a joyous atmosphere. The gentle and comforting breeze of the wind swept across, allowing the luxurious grass to dance with delight. It's so peaceful, is it not? Kurama spoke, his powerful voice conflicting with the serene surroundings. I can remember when every day was as peaceful as this when I was young, but now our world is full of corruption and deceit. Kurama whispered softly. Those responsible want nothing more than to see the world as we know it burn to ashes around us. Naruto calmly suggested, I'll stop them before they can achieve that, as he proceeded along the lengthy dirt path that led to the sand village. You don't even know what those responsible look like. Words mean nothing at this stage, Kurama said, laughing softly at Naruto's unwavering dedication. Let's hope that Shukaku has some insight as to what is going on, Naruto said, remaining silent. What should we do then if he doesn't? Asked Naruto. In response, Kurama said solemnly, there won't be much to do. Our situation will become even more dire than it already is. Perhaps the two Tails, Matabi, would have some idea as to what is going on, Kurama said quickly. What do you think the two Tails would know about this? Naruto asked softly, why the two Tails? I'm not saying Matabi would know the answers to our questions, but he might be able to provide us with some information if Shukaku is unable to do so. Naruto started to notice that there was less of the vegetation in the area, so he looked around and was surprised to see a large desert just ahead of him. He walked on and in a few seconds he arrived at the beginning of the desert, where the golden grains of sand shone with brilliance and the gentle wind changed into a coarse and tempestuous force that threw sand within its tempest at great velocity. Naruto took a deep breath, undid the sleeves around his waist, and put on his coat to protect himself from the harsh winds. He entered the desert, his feet sinking into the dense sand, making it difficult to move, and he yanked them out of the sand and took another step. This continued for the better part of 1 hour, with Naruto frantically dodging and waving his way past violent, sand-ridden hurricanes. The tempests only increased in ferocity as time went by. Only the smallest of creatures inhabited the large desert. Not a living soul could be seen in any direction of the foreboding sandy wasteland. Once the gates of the village of sand was in sight, Naruto gradually slowed his pace to a complete stop, as to allow him time to devise a strategy for getting into the sand village undetected. Naruto began thinking through several different scenarios. He imagined walking up to the gates and knocking, hoping the guards would be foolish enough to let him through. He shook his head, if I wanted to be killed on sight, I guess that would be the preferred action. He thought to himself jokingly. He then thought about entering the village from underneath, but knew it would be a risky move, as he wouldn't be able to accurately pinpoint his exit. For all I know, I could end up in front of guards. He quickly ruled out going in from under the ground. Naruto then thought about climbing over the large walls of the village. The only problem with this method was the numerous guards situated as lookouts. He had to find a way to disable all of the lookouts before he could even think about looking for Gaara. After listening to Naruto's thoughts, Kurama hurriedly said, it seems like your best option is to climb the walls. Naruto answered his beastly counterpart, yeah, maybe. I count 7 guards up there, and I'd have to incapacitate each of them before I can actually get into the village of sand. I'd have to do it without being noticed as well. Kurama enthusiastically said, I've seen you do more difficult feats. You should be able to do this without even trying. This gave Naruto the confidence he needed to move forward. How do you think you'll do it? Kurama asked quietly. Upon re-examining the defensive walls that surrounded the village, Naruto saw that there was a guard's post without a guard stationed there. He quickly figured out that this particular point was a blind spot, meaning that no guards could see it because the harsh sun's blinding rays forced the guards to look the other way, making it vulnerable to exploitation. Slowly raising his arm, he pointed to the unguarded area and said, right there. I can climb up the wall and enter through there. That way, the guards won't see me. The sun will cover me until I get up there. Once you get up there, you'll have to be strategic. If any of the guards are alerted, they'll move the cage and you'll be forced to fight to the death with any remaining guards, Kurama said, chuckling a little at Naruto's rapid observation of the area. Naruto took a deep breath and said, so to say it simply, I can't fuck up. Kurama simply grunted in response, and Naruto slowly made his way to the wall, avoiding the guard outside the gate as he did so. Why did the Sand Village have to have so many guards? He thought to himself in frustration, and he shook the thought from his mind and continued to make his way to the weak spot in the wall. Naruto was careful to make as little noise as he could, but as he lifted his foot to take another step, his left foot collided with the rock, sending it flying towards the wall. The rock tapped the wall with little force, but the sudden noise that followed was enough to draw the guard outside the gate. Shit, Naruto thought to himself as he fled for the wall, reaching it just in time to avoid the guard's stares. To find the source of the nearly silent sound he had heard, the guard quickly looked around. Hello? He asked in a petrified manner, before leaving his post to investigate. Naruto had his back to the wall, and was out of the guard's sight, but he knew that if the guard found him, it would jeopardize the entire mission. Naruto stood still, silent, as he peered from the corner of the wall, watching as the guard stumbled towards Naruto's position. Who's there? The guard asked, this time with more authority in his voice. The guard drew a kunai from his pocket. Naruto remained still, quieting his breathing to the point where it was almost silent. The guard was just centimeters away from Naruto. The guard spotted a lone rock on the floor, and breathed a huge sigh of relief. It was just the wind. He whispered to himself, as he placed his kunai back in his pocket. Just as the guard sheathed his kunai, Naruto jumped from behind the corner. The guard couldn't finish his sentence before Naruto hit him in the neck with the side of his palm, causing his body to slump to the ground and start snoring softly. After staring at the guard for a few seconds, Naruto leaned down to pick him up, slung the guard loosely over his shoulder, and carried him back to the gate, all the while keeping a close eye on the guards above in case any of them noticed. Naruto dropped the guard on the ground and ran back to the wall, looking up as he started to climb the tall wall, placing his feet carefully on stable rock and pushing himself up while grabbing pieces of exposed rock with his soft hands. He kicked off from the wall, the sudden pressure causing the rock to fall to the ground with a loud bang. For fuck's sake. That wall needs serious repairing. It's always fucking breaking. A loud voice above Naruto said as he hung from the wall with one hand. Don't fix what ain't broke, right? The case cage doesn't believe the wall is in bad enough shape to be fixed. Another voice replied. The two voices formerly shared a light laugh. The sound of laughter then died out. Naruto began silently breathing, and then very carefully placed his foot on another piece of rock, this time being cautious to not breaking anything. He placed another hand on a piece of rock and pulled himself up. Naruto reached the top of the wall, and poked his head above to scan the area. To his relief, he saw no guards in front of him, and so pulled himself up. He then crouched to as low down as he could, and took cover behind a waist-high plank of wood. He poked his head from the corner and quickly spotted a guard sitting on a rusty stool, eating noodles from a large bowl. Naruto looked around and noticed no other guards were looking at this guard in particular, and took the opportunity to disable him. Naruto jumped from his cover and lunged at the guard, striking his neck in the same fashion as the first guard. The guard gave no cries of protest, and the steaming bowl of noodles slipped from the guard's fingers. Naruto was unable to catch the falling bowl of noodles, and crashed as it made contact with the hard floor. Naruto froze with guard in hand. Noodle. Boy, that's your fourth bowl today. Do you enjoy pissing us off or something? The voice was that of the same guard who had made the joke about the rock falling from the wall, and Naruto recognized it. Another voice said, just leave him, he's only new, and you know he doesn't speak to anyone. Naruto used the brief conversation to conceal the guard's body in his arms, dragging it to the area of cover where Naruto was concealed, and then dropping the guard. After hearing progressively louder footsteps ahead of him, Naruto hid behind the wooden plank and said, Noodle. Boy, what did I say, abo? The guard froze for a few seconds, looking around and scratching his head in bewilderment. Has anyone seen? Naruto came up behind the guard and struck him, putting him to sleep just like he had the other two before him. Naruto walked down the wide sand path, his body hunched to prevent any guards from seeing him, thinking to himself, 2 down, 5 to go. He also concealed the body of this guard. Kurama roared from inside Naruto's head, so far, so good, Naruto. Boy. Just don't get too comfortable, these guards are highly trained. A guard emerged from a small hut with his back to Naruto, yawning loudly and stretching as though he had just woken up from a deep sleep. Naruto froze in shock, and he quickly incapacitated the guard with a quick blow to the neck, concealing the body in the small hut and placing it on a bed. Naruto tapped his hand on the hut's door and performed a quick hand seal, which reassured him. That was too close for comfort, Naruto thought to himself as he left the hut. After finding his way to the center of the path, Naruto hid behind another waist high plank of wood and looked over his shoulder to see two guards engaged in a conversation. Is that really what that bitch said? One of the guards responded to the other guard's previous statement. The other guard's voice was emotional and raspy as he answered, yeah, she said she wants a divorce, and that she still loves her ex. In an attempt to show sympathy for his friend, the guard said, hey, don't even think about it. She was no good for you anyway. I bet she's going to come crawling back on all fours just begging for you to fuck her, and you know it just as well as I do. The guard then wiped away a tear as he laughed at his friend's statement, saying, yeah, you're right. Did you hear about the bounty for those kids Nezuko and Hirata? You mean Hinata and Naruto, don't you? Yes, I am aware of it. The reward of a lifetime awaits the fortunate person who manages to capture those tiny runts. I heard that the Cage is close friends with that Naruto kid, so I don't know how the Cage is taking it, but that kind of money would serve us well, the guard said, taking a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket and putting one in his mouth.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.